We live on an ocean planet. A world 3/4 covered by water. A world of unexpected beauty, unparalleled adventure, and unyielding delight. Your ticket into this world is diving, and there's nothing like it. Diving experiences range from heart-pounding intense to not a care in the world tranquility, with lots in between. And it's all your choice. Diving takes you to some of the most lush, exotic destinations known. But you can go underwater practically in your own backyard. Diving opens the door to so many different activities and places that where you dive and what you do while diving changes as you do. The PADI Open Water Diver course is more than a scuba curriculum. It is the process of growing into something new. A certified PADI Open Water Diver. When you look back, you'll remember the PADI Open Water Diver course as much more than learning to use scuba gear. You'll remember it as your story of becoming a diver. Welcome to the PADI Open Water Diver course. Successfully meeting all the course requirements earned you the PADI Open Water Diver certification, the world's most popular and recognized scuba credential. This is important because diving has potential hazards you learn to avoid, because it has risks you accept, and because what you learn allows diving to be rewarding and meaningful. Dive centers, dive resorts, and dive boats require certification before you can rent scuba gear or have a cylinder filled. As a PADI Open Water Diver, you're trained to dive with a buddy to a maximum depth of 18 meters, 60 feet, or the deepest depth reached in training, in conditions comparable to those you train in. If you complete only the first 3 course sections and first 2 open water dives, you may be certified as a PADI scuba diver and trained to dive with a certified professional as deep as 12 meters, 40 feet, in conditions in which you have training or experience. The PADI Open Water Diver course has 3 parts: knowledge development, confined water dives, and open water dives. Knowledge development covers principles you need to know for safety and for diving enjoyment. During the confined water dives, you'll learn scuba skills with your instructor and practice applying them just like you will in open water. You make the open water dives with your instructor at real dive sites suited to beginning divers. During these, you'll practice and apply what you've learned in knowledge development in confined water. There are 5 knowledge development sections that correspond to 5 confined water dives and 4 open water dives. Your instructor has a lot of flexibility in sequencing and will go over the schedule with you. All PADI programs use performance-based and student-centered learning. These mean you progress by demonstrating you meet specific objectives. The course and materials emphasize helping you learn in the ways that work best for you. Having the skills and knowledge you need are what's important, not how long it takes, so you progress at your own rate. You must meet all the requirements for certification, but it's not a race. Student-centered learning means you progress at the pace that suits you and how you best develop ability and confidence. It's important to complete the knowledge developments in order, including the exercise questions and knowledge reviews before each session as your instructor assigns. Look and listen for the answers to the learning objective questions as you study. When you meet with your instructor, speak up about anything you're having trouble understanding. To get the most from the confined water dives, think of them as practice dives, so do everything just as you would in open water. Avoid habits that don't apply there. For instance, the ocean doesn't have a side to hang on to, so use your gear to stay up, not the pool side. Develop good habits because when you have a problem, you tend to do what you do by habit. During instructor demonstrations, note the details he emphasizes because they help you do the skill well. If you don't understand why you're learning something, ask. Finally, tell your instructor how you feel. He can only be certain that you're reasonably comfortable and confident if you speak up. Let your instructor know if you want more time before moving on. And it's your responsibility to postpone diving if you don't feel well or are ill or injured, until you're back to normal health. When it's time for your open water dives, prepare based on your instructor's recommendations. If you'll be diving from a boat and are prone to seasickness, see your doctor or pharmacist about an appropriate motion sickness remedy, and show up adequately fed and rested. Pay close attention during your instructor's briefings. Do your part in planning each dive, and speak up if you don't understand something. In learning to dive, get the pros at your PADI resort or dive center to help you choose your equipment. You can't dive without gear, and there are hundreds of options and features for each piece, with new models coming out all the time. Your local PADI Pro keeps up with the latest gear and can help you choose the best kit for you, your budget, and the types of diving you like. As you'll learn in more detail, you'll have to try on most equipment to find the right fit. Your PADI resort or dive center is the place to do this, with a professional there to help. Ideally, do this soon so you can learn to dive in your own gear. Equipment you choose with professional guidance usually has the best possible fit and the most comfort, and that adds a lot to your learning experience and enjoying diving after you're certified. PADI builds instructionally valid courses based on established instructional system design and educational psychology. Because of this, your PADI Open Water Diver certification may apply toward collegiate learning. The listed organizations offer college credit or credit recommendations. See your PADI instructor or visit PADI.com for more information. Your PADI instructor is a professional who is qualified to conduct PADI training. To reach this leadership position, your instructor has successfully completed a series of required PADI courses, including the Comprehensive Instructor Development course, followed by independent tests in the 2-day instructor examination. PADI dive centers and resorts are independent professional operations dedicated to meeting your diving needs. Visit your dive operation online and in person for help in choosing gear, gear servicing, dive travel, and staying plugged into the diving lifestyle. Going from learning to dive to being a diver means getting involved with the diving lifestyle. Although you're just starting the course, you'll enjoy diving more and stay involved if you start thinking now about what you want to do after the course. There's no need to wait. Get involved with the PADI Diving Society, Scuba Earth, and the Dive Club at your PADI resort or dive center. Look into the special interest courses that you can take after finishing this one, like underwater photography or using special dive gear. Plan a dive holiday. Pick out your first scuba kit. Join in your local dive operations Project Aware, Aquatic World Awareness, Responsibility, and Education efforts. Project Aware unites divers globally in activities and actions that preserve and protect the underwater world. Do any of these or all, or something else, but begin your next steps as a diver now. That's the key to making your PADI Open Water Diver certification the start of new adventures instead of merely the end of a course. One of the great things about being a diver is it's something you can do all over the world, in lots of environments. During your PADI Open Water Diver training, You'll learn the foundational skills using the gear a beginning diver needs in your local environment. But different environments may call for different techniques or equipment. So, when diving in a new environment or at an unfamiliar site, get an experienced local diver or instructor to give you a Discover Local Diving orientation, a guided dive, or some additional training, whatever's most appropriate to the ins and outs of diving there. Especially as a new diver, you'll find it helps you enjoy diving more because you know where to look for the cool stuff, the right gear, and techniques to use and how to avoid any hazards unique to the area. And it's a great way to meet other divers and make new friends. When you visit someplace new, get local information from a PADI pro who knows the area. People differ in their strengths, talents, and limits, and PADI courses accommodate these differences. This opens diving for many people with a broad range of physical and intellectual capabilities. You must meet the performance requirements to earn your PADI Open Water Diver certification, but there are many ways to meet the same requirement. This is where PADI's student-centered approach makes a difference in meeting individual needs. For example, most divers may meet the requirement to enter water that is too deep in which to stand by stepping in with all their gear on. A diver with limited leg use, however, might meet the requirement by rolling in backward or pivoting in sideways from a seated position. So, if a suggested technique doesn't work for you, you and your instructor can adapt or create techniques that meet the objective. It's exciting being a diver because underwater, you experience new sensations. You feel pressure, swim almost weightlessly, and see and hear things differently. These result from the different physical properties that water and air have and relate directly to your safety and enjoyment as a diver. Right now, you're surrounded by pressure. It's the weight of the atmosphere of air. We call this 1 bar or atmosphere. When you go underwater, the water adds to this pressure. 10 meters, 33 feet of water adds the same pressure as the 1 atmosphere of air. So, the pressure increases 1 bar or atmosphere for every 10 meters or 33 feet you descend. Increasing pressure doesn't affect water, but it compresses a gas like air. So as you go deeper, pressure reduces an air volume and increases its density by pushing the molecules closer together. This pressure-volume density relationship is important because it affects air spaces including your ears, sinuses, lungs, and mask. It also affects controlling your buoyancy and how long your air lasts. As shown here, there's a relationship between the pressure and a gas's volume and density. At 10 meters or 33 feet, the pressure is twice the surface pressure, so half the air volume remains and the density doubles. The same relationship applies when you ascend. As the divers ascend, the gas re-expands so it's full of air at the surface. But what would happen if the divers inflated a balloon and sealed it at depth, then ascended? The air would expand and burst the balloon. To prevent this, the divers must keep the balloon unsealed and release some expanding air as they ascend. This is a very important concept we'll return to shortly. As you descend, water pressure compresses the air in your body air spaces. When descending, this primarily affects your ears, sinuses, and mask. A squeeze is discomfort caused by the imbalance between the water pressure and the airspace. A squeeze can injure you if you continue to descend. But you can prevent a squeeze by adding air to air spaces to balance the pressure. This is called equalization. Equalize your ears and sinuses by blowing gently against your blocked nostrils, or by swallowing and wiggling your jaw. Blow through your nose into your mask to equalize your mask. Equalize frequently as you descend before you feel discomfort. You shouldn't ever feel pain. If you can't equalize, stop your descent. Signal your buddies or the instructor. They can't tell that you're having difficulty unless you do. Ascend slightly and try again. If you still can't equalize, discontinue the dive and try another day. Continuing to descend with unequalized air spaces can lead to serious injuries. A cold or allergy that causes congestion can make equalizing difficult or impossible, so don't dive until you're well. Equalize gently. Never attempt a forceful and/or extended equalization. A forceful extended equalization can cause serious, permanent ear injuries. Earplugs create an airspace that you can't equalize, so don't use them while scuba diving. Increasing pressure may affect other body airspaces. It's rare, but an airspace can form under a tooth filling and cause discomfort. There's no way to equalize this, but your dentist can correct it. A dry suit holds an air layer around your body that compresses. You learn to add air to equalize it when you take the PADI Dry Suit Diver course. Air expands as you ascend, and normally exits your internal ear spaces, mask, and sinuses without doing anything. But expanding air can be a serious issue related to your lungs. Using scuba, your lungs are at normal volume at depth. If you were to hold your breath and ascend, expanding air would overexpand and rupture your lungs, much like it bursts a balloon filled and sealed at depth. For this reason, the most important rule in scuba diving is to breathe continuously and never, ever hold your breath. Even small depth changes can cause lung overexpansion injuries. If you hold your breath, lung overexpansion can cause severe injuries, including paralysis and death. Medical treatment requires a pressurized recompression chamber, but diving commonly takes place several hours from such chambers. But while lung overexpansion injuries are very serious, they are also very easy to avoid. Breathe continuously and never hold your breath while scuba diving. This way, during ascent, expanding air escapes without issue. If you don't have your regulator in your mouth, exhale a slow, steady bubble stream so you don't hold your breath. Also, never dive with lung congestion, which has some risk of trapping air in your lungs and causing overexpansion injuries. It is rare, but some body air spaces may have a reverse block. This means expanding air can escape. Diving with a cold or allergy can cause a reverse block, but again, you shouldn't dive with a cold. Gas forming in your digestive system can cause some discomfort if it doesn't pass. And an airspace under a dental filling may, again very rarely, cause one. If you experience a reverse block, stop your ascent. Descend a meter or a few feet or so, and give the trapped air time to work itself out. Then continue your ascent more slowly. As you've learned, as you go deeper and the pressure increases, the more a gas volume decreases. This means that the deeper you are, the more air each breath uses from your cylinder. So the deeper you are, the faster you use your air. Because the air is denser with depth, it takes more effort to breathe. Take slow, deep breaths while scuba diving. Pace yourself and avoid getting winded or out of breath. If you have a problem, stop and maintain or restore slow, deep breathing. As a scuba diver, 1. Breathe continuously and never ever hold your breath. 2. Breathe slowly and deeply. 3. Don't allow yourself to get winded or out of breath. And 4. If faced with a problem, stop and maintain and/or restore slow, deep breathing. When you put something in water, buoyancy pushes the object upward. The upward force is equal to the weight of the displaced water. Whether something floats, sinks, or does neither depends upon whether it weighs less than, more than, or the same as the water it displaces. As a diver, you primarily use your weight system in BCD, buoyancy control device, to control your buoyancy. As you descend, you tend to lose buoyancy. You add air to adjust for the change. When you come up, you become more buoyant, so you vent air to adjust. You'll discover that even breathing changes your buoyancy. It increases slightly when you inhale and decreases slightly when you exhale. By mastering buoyancy control, you enable yourself to control your descent and ascent rates, to stop at any depth, to save energy, to stay off the bottom, or to float comfortably on the surface. Recreational divers do not dive alone. You always dive with a buddy or buddies. Together, you plan your dives, help each other gear up, safety check each other, provide dive time reminders, assist with problems, and assist with the dive objective. The buddy system is important for practicality because you assist each other, and for safety because you can help each other prevent and handle problems. It's also important because diving is a social activity. You'll find diving is more rewarding and fun simply because you get to share your underwater adventures and experiences with others. Without the equipment that adapts you to going underwater, diving's impossible. So to become a diver, you need to learn about scuba gear, the basics on how it works, and how to choose it. Like most divers, you'll probably enjoy getting to know your gear. You find literally dozens of makes, styles, and models of scuba gear, which is great because it allows you to choose equipment that accommodates your size and preferences. How do you know what's best for you? After you learn the basics about what your gear does and how it works, as a beginner, your best bet is to have a pro at your PADI resort or dive center help you. The gear you invest in will last years with proper care, but like all technologies, scuba continues to advance. Stay up to date with the latest innovations. You'll probably trade up over time, not because something older doesn't work anymore, but because there's something newer that you like better. There are some basics in choosing and caring for dive equipment that apply to virtually all your gear. The most important considerations in choice are suitability, fit, and comfort. Suitability means it's appropriate for the diving you want to use it for, like choosing a full wetsuit for cool water rather than a short wetsuit used in the warm tropics. Fit is important because a lot of gear doesn't work right if it's the wrong size. You get the right fit by choosing the right size. Comfort means the gear has the right feel and configuration. Properly adjusted gear that fits right is usually comfortable, but not always. If it's not comfortable, keep looking. After addressing suitability, fit, and comfort, secondary considerations include finding the cost and features that work for you, and making sure you have access to service, though dive operations almost always service the brands they sell. You can usually choose colors and styles that go with the rest of your kit. And remember the accessories that go with each piece. These little items add a lot to your enjoyment. Ask your dive professional for suggestions. Caring for your gear includes inspecting it for proper operation and for any wear or damage before each use. Never dive with any equipment that is not in good working order. Have something that's not right corrected before diving with it. After each dive, rinse everything in clean, fresh water and let it dry out of the sun before storing it. As reasonably possible, protect your gear from extended periods in direct sunlight. You'll learn that some pieces require additional maintenance and service by a professional. And follow any maintenance and service requirements in the manufacturer literature. You need a mask because your eyes must be in air to focus properly. Since this creates an airspace you must equalize, your dive mask must enclose your nose as well as your eyes. Never scuba dive with goggles because you can't equalize them. Choose a good quality mask made specifically for scuba diving. Your PADI dive shop can help you check the fit. After finding some that fit you, look for a low profile and a wide vision field. The silicone color is usually either clear or black. You often can choose from different frame colors. With a new mask, you may need to scrub the interior with a cleaner. Check the manufacturer literature. Adjust the strap so it fits snugly but comfortably, with the strap over the crown of your head. A snorkel is standard equipment for recreational diving. It lets you breathe, look, swim, and rest with your face in the water or waves without wasting scuba air, or if you're low after coming up. You usually choose your mask and snorkel together. You attach it with a clip or snorkel keeper. Get one that fits comfortably when adjusted with the top at the crown of your head. Many divers like a snorkel that flexes away when you're not using it. Most scuba snorkels have self-drain valves to help you blow out water. And many have guards that reduce water splashing in. After choosing the right fit and options, you can usually match the color to your mask. Fins allow your powerful leg muscles to push you through the water. You can choose from adjustable fins, which you usually wear with wetsuit boots, and full-foot fins, which fit like slippers. Since you don't use wetsuit boots, they're usually reserved for warm water. You choose fins based on blade and foot pocket size. Small bladed fins are suited to snorkeling, but not scuba. Be sure to get fins appropriate for scuba diving. Have a professional help you choose the right fit. Fins have options, including the materials they're made from, as well as splits and vents to improve performance. Adjustable fins may feature quick-release buckles or spring heels for convenience in adjusting, donning, and removing. Your PADI professional can help you choose from these options. Besides inspecting and adjusting them, you don't have to do much before diving other than closing the quick-release buckles if yours have them. Get full-foot fins wet to make them easier to slip on. Regular fins aren't much use to someone with limited leg mobility, but there are other ways to get around. Webbed gloves allow such divers to swim with surprising strength. DPVs, or diver propulsion vehicles, are a fun way for any diver to be mobile underwater. But you should be able to use your legs or arms in case it has a problem. Your scuba kit is actually 4 equipment systems integrated into a single package. Your BCD, buoyancy control device, holds everything together. As you learned, you use it to control your buoyancy. Your cylinder supplies high-pressure air to your regulator, which provides it to you when you inhale. Your weight system holds just enough lead to let you descend. Its quick release lets you easily drop your weight in an emergency. We'll look at each of the systems more closely next. Scuba gear is generally interchangeable, but because everything integrates, you usually select your scuba kit as a package that puts everything together to meet your preferences. 5 components make up your BCD. It has a bladder you inflate and deflate to control your buoyancy. The bladder integrates with a harness or jacket with a band that securely holds your cylinder. The low-pressure inflator lets you use it to add air directly from your cylinder by pressing a button. You use the other button to deflate the bladder or inflate it orally. Overpressure valves are designed to prevent rupturing from accidentally overfilling the bladder. Some of these have quick dump releases you can use to deflate the BCD. The weight system pockets hold lead weights, but you can release them quickly. You have options regarding BCD features. Beyond getting the right size and fit, some have more air capacity than others. Pockets and D-rings for storing and clipping accessories come in handy. Many divers like shoulder quick releases that make getting out of your kit easier. BCDs are among the most stylish pieces of gear, and you can choose from several looks. Adjust your BCD so it's snug, but not too tight while wearing your exposure suit. Inflate it to be sure it doesn't restrict breathing. After it's set, attach an emergency whistle to the low-pressure inflator and mount the hose retainers that hold some of the regulator components. When caring for your BCD, rinse the inside of the bladder as well as the outside. Drain it, and after drying, store it with a bit of air inside. Your regulator has 5 components. The first stage attaches to the cylinder valve and supplies air to the other components. You breathe from the second stage. It delivers air only when you inhale, or when you press the manual purge button. Your alternate air source is a second stage on a longer hose that you use to share in an emergency. You'll learn about other types of alternate air sources too. The low-pressure inflator hose supplies air to your BCD inflator, and your SPG, submersible pressure gauge, tells you how much air you have. An SPG may be separate or part of your dive computer, and it may be on a hose or use a transmitter that sends air supply information to your dive computer. Ease of breathing is the most important consideration when you choose a regulator. Modern regulators meet the requirements for recreational diving, but the higher-end models usually breathe the easiest. You'll choose between the yoke system or the DIN system. Many divers choose DIN with yoke system adapters. You can adjust many higher-end regulators to keep the breathing optimal. Some have pre-dive switches that avoid accidental air release when it's not in your mouth. Besides the popular second stage on a longer hose as your alternate air source, you may opt for an alternate inflator regulator, which combines a second stage with your BCD inflator. Some divers carry independent pony bottles, which would allow them to handle an air supply problem without buddy assistance. Preparing your regulator requires attaching these components to the appropriate ports, which you should leave to a scuba professional. Regulators are robust and reliable, but have a couple of maintenance considerations. When rinsing, keep the first stage dust cap in place or leave it attached to a cylinder so water doesn't enter the air inlet. Don't press the purge button when rinsing the second stage with fresh water, because doing so could let water flow backward into it. Regulators require professional overhauls every 1 to 2 years. Have your dive center do this as required by the manufacturer. Scuba regulators are surprisingly simple. Air flows from the first stage to the second stage, which you can think of as a cup with a mouthpiece, a flexible diaphragm, and one-way valves. When you inhale, water pressure causes the diaphragm to flex inward, depressing the air valve lever. This releases air that you breathe in. When you exhale, the diaphragm relaxes, the lever rises, and the valve closes. One-way valves vent your exhalation into the water, where it rises as bubbles. Although there are variations, it is this simple design that makes scuba diving possible. Your scuba cylinder, sometimes called a tank, holds high-pressure breathing air. Made of steel or aluminum alloy, it has a chrome-plated valve that turns open and closed to enable or disable airflow to the regulator. You can choose from different sizes, and you match your regulator with respect to a yoke valve or DIN valve. Some DIN valves accept an insert so they can take yoke regulators too. All cylinders have markings stamped into the metal and labels stuck onto them with the working pressure and the dates of pressure tests and inspections. Your dive center checks these when you have your cylinder filled. You may see a cylinder with this marking, which means it's used with enriched air nitrox. You must be certified as an enriched air diver to use these cylinders. You'll learn more about enriched air a bit later. Follow these handling precautions. Don't leave a cylinder standing unattended, especially if your kit's set up. Lay it down, BCD up, so it doesn't fall. Block and restrain cylinders in a boat or car so they can't roll or slide. On boats, keep cylinders in their racks so they can't fall and injure someone or damage equipment. Scuba cylinders require pressure testing every 2 to 5 years and visual inspection annually. Have your local dive center do these for you. Open and close the valve gently and never completely drain it. Lay your cylinder down before and after diving, but for storage, keep it standing someplace it won't get knocked over, out of excessive heat. Scuba air must be specially filtered and filled with special breathing air compressors, so have your cylinder filled only at a professional dive resort or dive center. As mentioned before, your weight system's most important feature is a quick release that lets you drop enough weight so you float reliably in an emergency. Most BCD weight systems do this with 2 releasable pockets. It may also have small non-releasable weights you use for trim adjustment, that is, your balance in the water. Your BCD and weight placement determine trim, and your instructor will show you how to adjust it for a level, horizontal position in the water. BCD integrated weight systems are the most popular, but some divers use separate weight belts. Your instructor may also have you use small accessory weights to help adjust your trim. These should be only a fraction of the weight you wear, so they don't need to quick release. Let's go over the skills you'll be learning as a diver. You'll practice many or all of these during your first confined water dive. The previews you see here show you the basics that apply to most equipment and divers. But there are many ways to accomplish most skills, so your instructor may show you a different method as appropriate for you and your gear. The first skill is setting up your kit. Start by inspecting everything for wear or damage. If you have a new BCD, wet it or at least the cylinder band. This helps it stay adjusted. Slide the BCD onto the cylinder with the valve opening facing the BCD to about this height. You can adjust it later to suit your preference. Tighten and then lock the cylinder band. These vary, so get your instructor to help if necessary. Lift everything by the BCD and make sure the cylinder doesn't slip or move. If it does, tighten the band. Remove the first stage dust cap and the cylinder valve cap, if it has one. Make sure there's an O-ring and that it's not damaged. With the yoke system, it's part of the valve opening. With DIN, check here on the regulator. You can't dive without this O-ring. If it's missing or appears damaged, your instructor will show you how to replace it. With your BCD facing away from you, fit the first stage to the valve so that the primary second stage, the one you breathe from, goes to the right, and the low-pressure inflator hose to the BCD goes to the left. Secure the first stage just finger tight. Cylinder pressure will keep everything secure after you open the valve. Connect the low-pressure hose to the BCD inflator, like this. Holding the SPG away from you, slowly open the cylinder valve all the way until it stops. Check to be sure you have a full cylinder, or at least enough air for the dive. Press the purge button like this. Airflow should stop when you let go. Exhale into the mouthpiece. Exhalation should be easy. Then, take a few breaths. Breathing should be easy and smooth. If your regulator free flows or continues to release air after you stop breathing, or seems to have some other problem, notify your instructor. Next, test your BCD inflator like this. Secure your SPG and alternate air source so neither will protrude or dangle underwater. Your SPG usually comes under your left arm and an alternate second stage under your right. Attach your alternate with a quick release so that it's in this triangle area when you're wearing your gear. This keeps it out of the way, yet visible and quickly accessible if it's needed. Check that you've reconnected shoulder release buckles and loosen the waist strap. If you won't be diving for a while, say an hour or more, close the valve and depressurize the regulator by pressing the purge button. This saves your air if there's a leak you didn't notice. Depressurizing also reduces the chance of you accidentally getting water in it with the valve closed. Loosen any straps you can tighten after you put your rig on so it's easier to get into. Secure your kit so it can't fall or lay it down. On your first confined water dive, you may gear up in shallow water, but often you kit up seated out of the water, like this, or standing, like this. Let's go over the steps. Before getting into your kit or exposure suit, get everything else ready. Defog your mask, then adjust it, your fins, and snorkel as necessary. Your scuba kit should be fully assembled and ready to go, like you just learned. To avoid overheating when it's hot, put on your exposure suit last, just before getting into your scuba kit. Wetsuits fit snugly and take some effort. The order depends on the type. With this common style, start with the bottoms, followed by the boots, hood if you're wearing one, and jacket. Your instructor will show you the right order for your suit. Dry suits are single pieces and differ in how you put them on. If you're using one in this course, your instructor will show you how to get into yours. You can put on wrist-mounted instruments now, though some divers wait until they're in their scuba kits. If you're using a weight belt, that goes on next. Wear it so it has the standardized right hand release. If your BCD has a crotch strap, which is not common in recreational diving, your weight belt goes on after you have your scuba kit on. This is necessary so the crotch strap doesn't trap the belt and make it hard to drop in an emergency. If possible, it's best to get into your kit seated. But sometimes buddies have to hold their rigs for each other. Dive gear is moderately heavy, so use proper lifting whenever you move it. This means bend at the knees and lift by standing. Keep your back straight with its normal curve, like this. Raise your upper chest and stick out your buttocks slightly to keep your back in the right position. Exhale as you lift. Never bend your back to lift scuba gear, or anything else that's heavy for that matter. If you have to hold your buddy's kit, support it with your strong arm and hand on the cylinder bottom and the other balancing it like this. The stronger diver usually kits up first because the diver will be wearing and holding gear at the same time. If your physical characteristics make lifting, standing, and/or walking in scuba equipment unreasonable and/or unsafe, don't do it. Ask for help as necessary, and there are plenty of alternative methods for getting into your kit. While seated or with a buddy holding your kit, slip into your BCD and tighten the straps with the weight off your shoulders. Check for trapped hoses. Then, secure all the releases and buckles. Check the cylinder height by tilting your head. If it touches the first stage, readjust the cylinder lower. When your buddy or buddies are ready, you perform a pre-dive safety check and confirm gear operation, location, and connection for each other. You'll learn the details to this in Section 2. Put your mask on by placing it against your face for a good seal, and then pulling the strap back. Develop good habits by always having your mask on in the water, even at the surface. This protects your eyes from unexpected splashes and waves, and lets you see underwater to check your buddy's gear, for instance, if you have to deal with a sudden problem. It also keeps the defog from washing out. Put on your gloves, then your fins go on last, just before entering the water. Buddies help steady each other, donning fins one at a time. Don't forget to wet full-foot fins so you can put them on easier. Avoid walking with fins on as much as possible. Put them on as close to the water as you can. If you must walk while wearing them, be cautious and walk backwards so you don't trip over. Sometimes you put your fins on after you enter the water, like when training in a pool. At this point, you're ready to get in, using one of several possible entry techniques you'll learn during the course. You constantly use your BCD to control your buoyancy. Before entering, partially inflate it so you will float, say about 1/3. Inflate using short bursts, like this. You can also inflate it orally, which you'll practice. To deflate your BCD in the water, breathe from your regulator and raise and depress the exhaust button like this. Air will vent from the BCD and you'll descend. During the course, you practice using your BCD until you can stay neutrally buoyant, like being weightless, whenever you want. Release and add air in small amounts so you avoid accidental rapid descents and ascents. For the first dive, you'll use your BCD primarily at the surface. Make a habit of floating positively buoyant with your mask on, breathing from your snorkel or regulator. Inflate your BCD before entering the water, and inflate it first thing when you come up from a dive. If you have a problem at the surface, immediately make yourself buoyant. Inflate your BCD. Later, you'll also learn to drop your weight so you're buoyant. When everything's set, your instructor will have you go underwater using scuba. Your first breaths underwater are exhilarating. Breathing underwater is one of the unique experiences that makes diving special. Enjoy the moment. Breathe slowly, deeply, and don't hold your breath. Chances are, you'll never forget your first breath underwater. You can't talk using standard recreational scuba gear, so you and your buddies use hand signals. Here are some widely accepted signals, but you may learn some regional ones as well as make some up with your buddies for the circumstances. Okay or okay. Stop. Go up or end the dive. Something's wrong. Which way? Boat. Ears not clearing. Come here. Watch me. Get with your buddy. Hold hands. You lead, I'll follow. Down or descend. Low on air. Out of air. Share air. Slow down or calm down. Breathe. How much air do you have? Danger or hazard. turn the dive, or head back. I'm cold. At the surface, you use large signals that are more visible from a boat or shore. This means okay or okay. If you can only use one hand, it's like this. This means distress or help me. Your instructor may show you additional signals that apply to training. You find that you understand signals in context with what's happening. See if you can figure out what these divers are saying. You should have recognized that the trailing diver was having trouble keeping up. He signaled stop and something is wrong. The buddy replied to stop, breathe, and slow down. That is, take it easy and to catch his breath. The diver signaled let me rest a little. A little is not an official signal, but you can tell what he meant. This is normal diver communication. When your regulator leaves your mouth, it fills with water, so you'll learn 2 ways to clear it and resume breathing. The first is the exhalation method. If you have a breath in your lungs, replace the mouthpiece and blow into it. This pushes the water out. Your head needs to be relatively upright so the exhaust valves are in the lowest position. And of course, you must exhale before you inhale. Use the purge method if you don't have much air to exhale. Replace the second stage, stick your tongue against the mouthpiece to block it, and push the purge button for a moment, like this. This pushes out the water. Blocking the mouthpiece helps keep water from spraying in and making you cough. With either method, because you should never hold your breath, remember to blow a steady stream of small bubbles when the regulator is out of your mouth. It helps to make a continuous ah sound so you keep your airway open. After clearing, inhale your first breath gently and cautiously, in case there's residual water. If you release your second stage, depending upon your position, it may drop in front of you or it may end up behind your shoulder out of sight. To recover with the arm sweep method, in a relatively upright position like this, lower your right shoulder. Extend your right arm backward along your cylinder, then sweep outward like this to locate the hose. Follow the hose to the second stage, replace and clear it. With the reach method, reach back to the first stage, find where the hose attaches and follow it out like this. It sometimes helps to lift the cylinder up and to the right with your left hand. With either method, blow bubbles when the regulator is not in your mouth. When swimming, a dropped regulator usually hangs in front of you where it's easy to find. But if you ever have difficulty relocating your second stage, don't waste time trying to find it. Just switch to your alternate air source and then get your buddy to help. It's normal for some water to trickle into your mask, but it's easy to get rid of it. Hold the top of your mask, then while exhaling slowly and steadily through your nose, look upward. Your breath forces the water out the bottom edge of your mask. Start exhaling before you look up so you don't get a little water in your nose. Some masks have a purge valve for clearing. If yours does, hold the mask firmly against your face and look down while exhaling. The water goes out the valve. By the way, if you normally wear contact lenses but can see well enough without them, you may want to have them out during your training dives. But if you need them, tell your instructor and keep your eyes closed so you don't lose them when learning to clear your mask. Use your SPG to manage your air supply at all times. With good air monitoring and management habits, you avoid running out of air. so they're obviously important habits to develop. With a full cylinder, your SPG reads close to the cylinder working pressure. Pay attention to how fast you use your air. You'll notice you use it faster as you exert more and when you dive deeper. With experience, you get a feel for how much air you use. Also with experience, you'll use less air as you relax, control your buoyancy better, and move more efficiently. Note the caution zone, which indicates when you have 50 bar or 500 psi left. If your SPG is part of your computer, the display may blink or have some other alert. This is your reserve pressure. You plan and execute dives so you have at least this remaining after you're out of the water. During training, alert your instructor when you're getting close to 50 bar or 500 psi. Your instructor may ask for alerts at other pressures. During the course, you'll learn to turn the dive, that is, head back to the boat or shore, based on your remaining air supply. You learned about equalization earlier. Recall that you need to equalize as you descend to avoid squeezes. Equalize gently and often, every meter or few feet. Equalize your mask by blowing into it from your nose. Descend slowly and be patient. Do not use long, forceful equalization, which can damage your ears and cause hearing loss. If you have difficulty equalizing, stop your descent, signal your buddy and your instructor, ascend a bit and try again. After equalizing, descend more slowly and equalize more often. Never continue descending if you can't equalize. The most popular dive kick is the flutter kick. To do this without wasted effort, starting neutrally buoyant, horizontal and level, kick from the hip with your arms at your side or against your body, like this. Your knee doesn't bend much, and it's a slow, long kick. Stay well above the bottom so you don't damage fragile organisms. You may learn other kicks depending upon your preferences or to meet specific needs. This is the frog kick. Many experienced divers use it most of the time instead of the flutter kick. With proper air management, an air supply emergency should be highly unlikely. But as a diver, you'll know how to manage the problem should it occur. Were you to find yourself out of air, if possible, you would use an alternate air source, most commonly provided by your buddy. Signal out of air and share air. Your buddy responds by providing her alternate second stage, though you can secure it yourself if she doesn't. If your buddy uses an alternate inflator regulator, she switches to it and provides you the primary from her mouth. Either way, secure the alternate, clear it, and begin breathing. Grip each other's right forearms like this. This keeps you together and leaves your left hand free to deflate your BCD and control your buoyancy as you ascend. Take just a moment to get settled if you need to, then ascend at a safe rate to the surface. You'll learn to ascend at a safe rate with your buddy. Signal up to your buddy. Start your ascend by swimming upward. You should not need to put air in your BCD. As you come up, look up, reach up, and come up slowly, like this, staying with your buddy and checking overhead regularly. Breathe normally and don't hold your breath. Ascend slowly. Your computer may warn you if you go too fast. Remember what you learned about expanding air? As you come up, the air in your BCD expands, so you have to vent some to keep from becoming too buoyant. Release small, regular bursts like this. During your first confined water dive, your instructor may do this for you. When you reach the surface, keep breathing from your regulator while you inflate your BCD. Once you're floating comfortably, you can switch to your snorkel. Again, make a habit of keeping your mask on and either your snorkel or regulator in your mouth while at the surface. If you need to float in an emergency, one option is to drop your weights, especially if you don't have air in your cylinder or have a BCD problem. Never hesitate to drop your weights at the surface. Remember, you don't have to drop all your weight, just enough to float. Dropping your weight underwater risks an uncontrolled rapid ascent, so you only do it if you're unsure you could reach the surface any other way. When you practice with your instructor, first make sure no one's below you. Breathe from your regulator and simulate a BCD problem by deflating it. You may have to kick to stay up. Then, quick release your weight, pull it well clear, and drop it. You'll float right up. After surfacing in an out-of-air emergency, or if you disconnected a runaway inflator, your BCD low-pressure inflator won't work, so you use oral inflation. At the surface, hold the BCD inflator-deflator with your left hand. Inflate by blowing into it while depressing the same button you usually use to deflate. Remove your mouthpiece, kick upward taking a breath, and blow about half to 2/3 of it into your BCD as you settle back into the water, like this. Repeat this until you're positively buoyant. Be sure to release the deflator button when you're not blowing in. Otherwise, the BCD will deflate, of course. How you exit the water depends upon the environment and your physical needs. You'll probably learn and practice several techniques. The following guidelines apply to most exits. 1. Establish positive buoyancy before switching to your snorkel. 2. Remove your fins before exiting, if appropriate for the technique. This helps you avoid walking with fins on. 3. Keep your mask on and breathe from your snorkel or regulator until you're on the boat or in calm water shallow enough in which to stand. After exiting, if you didn't take your fins off before exiting, sit as soon as you can or take them off with a buddy. It's usually easiest to get out of your gear seated, though buddies sometimes help each other while standing. Remember to use proper lift techniques, and on a boat, secure your equipment so it can't fall. When you're ready to take your gear apart, start by closing the cylinder valve. Depressurize the regulator by pressing the purge. Then disconnect the low pressure hose from the BCD inflator. Remove the first stage. Dry the dust cap and replace it. Take weights from the weight system and secure all the BCD buckles and straps. Release the cylinder band and slide off the BCD. Resecure the cylinder or, on shore, lay it down. Rinse everything like you've already learned.
An experienced diver once pointed out that diving isn't something you do, it's something you experience. There's something to that when you consider that underwater, seeing, hearing, moving, and breathing differ from what you're used to on land. Let's start with how you see and hear as a diver. Water is more dense than air, and this affects light. Light changes direction slightly when it enters your mask from the water, which causes about a 1/3 magnification. Depending on your perspective, this can make an object look larger, or closer, or both, though with experience, you mentally adjust for this without thinking about it. Water also reflects, scatters, and absorbs light, so the deeper you go, the less light there is. But your eyes are very sensitive. At most popular sites, you have adequate light during the day. Although you may not notice much light loss in clear water during the day, you may notice color loss. Water doesn't absorb light uniformly. It absorbs some colors before others. As you see here, you lose red, followed by yellow, green, and finally blue. Your eyes adjust for the color change, though you may be surprised at how much lost color a dive light reveals. The underwater world isn't silent. You may hear aquatic organisms, boats, divers, and other noises. Sound travels longer distances in water than in air. A boat that's too far away to hear at the surface may sound close underwater. Sound also travels about 4 times faster in water, and that makes it difficult to tell its direction. Usually, something sounds like it's coming from all around or overhead. You may be able to tell relative changes in distance by whether a sound gets louder or fainter. Because water's denser than air, it takes more effort to move through it. The faster you swim, the more energy you use. But what's the rush? Save your energy by moving slowly and steadily, avoiding rapid or jerking movements. Streamlining is part of swimming and moving effectively. You're streamlined when all your gear's secure and nothing dangles, and when you swim relatively level. As you learned in Section 1, trim is your balance in the water, ideally set so your head and feet stay relatively level in a swimming position. If you have too much weight, you add air to your BCD to compensate. This puffs it out, lifts your torso, and lowers your feet, all of which add drag and waste your energy. If you don't have enough weight, your BCD may be empty, but you'll have to kick downward to stay at depth. This puts your feet too high. You can also be weighted correctly, but have it distributed too low or too high on your body. During your training dives, your instructor will help you master correct weighting and trim. The right weight and trim make water's density work for you. As you dive, you stay neutrally buoyant, almost weightless, gliding through the underwater world. At the surface, you inflate your BCD so you float effortlessly. It's your ability to change your buoyancy that makes diving a unique experience. Normally, you'll end the dive when you're too cool for comfort, but be aware that water absorbs heat about 20 times faster than air does, so even water as warm as 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, can chill you after a while. To stay comfortable, you wear an exposure suit. A full wetsuit like this for moderately cool to moderately warm water, and a short wetsuit like this for tropical water. Use a dry suit in the coolest water. You'll learn more detail about exposure suits in a bit. Diving's not fun if you're cold, so if you get cold, end the dive and wear more protection the next time. Except in very warm water, even with an exposure suit, you'll still lose heat. The longer the dive, the more protection you wear, but even then, you'll eventually get chilled. Normally, you'll end the dive when you're too cool for comfort, but be aware that uncontrollable shivering is a sign of hypothermia, a serious condition in which your body has lost so much heat that it can be dangerous. If you begin to shiver continuously, exit the water immediately, dry off, and seek warmth. You've already learned that you breathe slowly, deeply, and continuously while diving. This is a more effective way to breathe dense air, and it reduces the effect of dead air space. Dead air space is the air in your breathing passages that doesn't reach your lungs. It's the first part of each inhalation and is higher in waste carbon dioxide. Dive gear adds dead air space. Slow, deep breaths make breathing more efficient because they reduce the proportion of dead air you inhale. It also helps you stay relaxed and clear-headed. Airway control is how you breathe past a little bit of water in the mouthpiece, which is common after clearing. The technique is to inhale slowly while looking downward. Since it's heavier than air, water stays in the mouthpiece as the air flows into your mouth and lungs. Put your tongue tip against the roof of your mouth to help deflect any water. After you get a breath, exhale sharply to clear the residual water. If a few droplets get on your throat, just cough while holding your snorkel or regulator in place. Overexertion usually results from prolonged exertion, like fighting a current, so you can start breathing faster than your regulator can deliver air. It can be frightening and may cause panic. Signs and symptoms include fatigue, labored breathing, feeling suffocated or air-starved, weakness, anxiety, headache, muscle cramping, and a tendency to panic. You help prevent overexertion by breathing slowly and deeply. If your breathing starts to rise, slow down. If you start to feel overexerted, stop all activity, signal your body, and rest. At the surface, make yourself buoyant. Underwater, hang on to something if you can, such as a rock or a dead coral. Wait until your breathing returns to normal before continuing at a slower, proper pace. If conditions make that difficult, abort the dive. Remember that when scuba diving, your breathing goal is to always breathe slowly, deeply, and continuously. As you've learned, you make and plan dives with a buddy. Dive plans don't have to be complex or lengthy, but they help you enjoy the dive more and prepare you to handle problems. Among other points specific to the dive as appropriate, a plan addresses entry and exit points and methods, the course you will follow, the maximum depth and time, a review of signals and communications, when to head back, usually based on your time or air supply, how you will stay together, what to do if separated from your buddy, emergency procedures, and your objective. You kit up together, helping each other as appropriate. Then, right before going in, you conduct the pre-dive safety check with the recall phrase, "Begin with review and friend," or any other phrase for BRAF. Begin, B for BCD. Check adjustment, operation, and partial inflation. Make sure the cylinder band is snug. Check that your surface signaling devices are in place. With, W for weights. Confirm correct weight amount and distribution, and that you can quick release and discard enough to float. Review, R for releases. Make sure all buckles and straps are secured and properly adjusted, and that buddies know how to work each other's releases. And A for air. Test breathe your regulator and alternate air source. Check your SPG to be sure you have enough air for the dive, plus a reserve. Buddies make sure they know where to find each other's alternate air sources. Friend, F for final check. Look each other over for loose straps, trapped hoses, anything out of sorts. Make the pre-dive safety check a habit. It only takes a moment, yet may help prevent close calls and accidents. During the dive, stay with your buddy or buddies. Remember that in clear water, you can be too far apart and yet still see each other. Know what you'll do if you get separated. The general procedure is to look for no more than a minute, then reunite on the surface if you haven't found each other. But in some circumstances, you may need to plan something different. When you have a 3-person team, you follow these procedures if any one buddy gets separated, even though 2 of you are still together. The buddy system works well when divers plan their dives together, pre-dive check together, stay together, and manage their air together. Remember, it's your responsibility to stay with your buddy or buddies. No one can do it for you. Managing your air supply is one of the most important dive skills. You've already learned about using your SPG. Now let's look at how you and your buddies manage your supplies together. People use air at different rates, so one buddy will always use air fastest. Throughout the dive, you and your buddies share air supply information because you turn the dive and head back based on the diver who reaches your planned turn pressure, the pressure at which you head back, first. Suppose you and a buddy dive from a boat with similar cylinders, full at 200 bar or 3000 psi. You agree on a 50 bar or 500 psi reserve. You also agree on 20 bar or 300 psi to cover your ascent and safety stop. Put that with your reserve to get the pressure at which you should be starting your ascent. In this case, you want to start ascending the boat mooring line with at least 70 bar or 800 psi remaining. Take 70 bar or 800 psi from your starting pressure, and that means you have 130 bar or 2200 psi for the dive itself, and you agree to head out until one of you has used half of this, 65 bar or 1100 psi. Then you'll head back using the other half. So, to find your turn pressure, the SPG pressure at which you turn around and head back, subtract 65 bar or 1100 psi from your starting pressure. In this case, your turn pressure is 135 bar or 1900 psi. This gets you back to the mooring line and back on the surface with your reserve. When you plan conservatively, it's common to reach your ascent point with more air than planned. If so, you can often continue the dive in the immediate area, then surface when you reach your ascent pressure. With conservative planning, unexpected delays will still usually let you reach your ascent point within your air supply limits. But if not, ascend as planned where you are and swim the rest of the way on the surface. Do not risk running out of air underwater. A final point: to adjust for differences in air supplies and starting pressures, plan air management based on the smallest supply. At the beginning and end of a dive, you commonly spend time at the surface in water too deep in which to stand. As you've learned, maintain a habit of keeping your mask on and breathing from your snorkel or regulator. Under stress, you tend to do what you do by habit, so these are the habits you want. You may prevent and handle difficulties more effectively when you can see and breathe with your face in the water. You respond much more slowly if you have to put your mask back on. With your mask on and a mouthpiece in place, you're less likely to be blinded or choked a bit by waves. And you're less likely to lose a mask that's on your face. Talk as necessary, but put your mouthpiece back in your mouth afterwards. If you're at the surface more than a few moments at the start of a dive, use your snorkel to save your air for the dive. At the end of a dive with a low cylinder, you may need your snorkel to breathe with your face in the water while swimming or in choppy conditions. When you have to get in the water some distance from where you want to dive, it's common to save air by using your snorkel on the surface to get there. You may snorkel as you look for your descent point from the surface. If you surface away from your exit point due to low air, you may have no choice but to make a surface swim. For short swims, or so you can see underwater, swim face down. But for long swims, it's less tiring on your back because the water supports the cylinder weight, though it's a little harder to navigate and watch where you're going. Maintain the buddy system. Communicate and stay together. Generally, it works well to swim side by side, like this. When you're ready to descend, you follow 5 steps. First, confirm your buddy is ready to descend. Then second, orient yourselves to something at the surface or underwater. Third, switch to your regulator. And fourth, Check your computer to be sure it's operational and hasn't gone into sleep mode. Activate your timer if you're using one. Fifth, signal descent and slowly deflate your BCD to start down together. As you start down, begin equalizing immediately and equalize frequently, every meter or few feet, as you learned previously. Descend with your head above your feet, like this, to help your orientation and equalization. You often have a line or slope as a reference. Usually, you use it as a visual reference and control your descent by controlling your buoyancy. But you may hold on to it in some circumstances, like diving in a current. When descending without a reference, stay in a buddy team, adjust your buoyancy, and control your descent by watching your computer. As you descend, your buoyancy decreases and you start to sink faster. This is because increased pressure compresses the gas in your exposure suit and it loses buoyancy. Add air to your BCD to compensate for this, or to your dry suit if you're wearing one. Use small, frequent adjustments for a slow, controlled descent. This helps you equalize every meter or few feet. Ideally, you arrive at the bottom neutrally buoyant by adjusting as you descend. Starting an ascent also has 5 steps. 1. Confirm your buddy is ready to ascend. 2. Check your computer to be sure you're within its limits. 3. Look up and hold your BCD deflator. Do not add air to your BCD. If you're properly weighted and neutrally buoyant, start your ascent by swimming up gently. 4. Ascend slowly, no faster than 18 meters or 60 feet per minute, or your computer's rate, whichever is slower. With most computers, your ascent rate is 10 meters or 30 feet per minute. Look up and turn as you ascend to make sure there's nothing above you. Reach up as you near and break through the surface. Check your computer and control your buoyancy to control your ascent rate. Your buoyancy increases as you ascend because air in your BCD and exposure suit expands. Control your buoyancy by releasing air from your BCD, or dry suit if you're wearing one, in small amounts frequently. When possible, ascend with your buddy or buddies along a reference, like a sloping bottom, mooring line, or a vertical line from a boat or float. Again, you normally use it as a visual reference, though you may ascend holding onto a line in situations like currents. You can ascend in mid-water without a reference by controlling your buoyancy and watching your depth and descent rate on your computer. To navigate while doing this, a common technique is for one buddy to control the ascent while another buddy focuses on navigation. Make a safety stop a normal part of your ascents. It's simply a pause somewhere between 6 meters or 20 feet and 3 meters or 10 feet, usually at 5 meters or 15 feet, for 3 to 5 minutes. Safety stops help you stabilize your ascent and give your body extra time to release dissolved gases. This helps reduce the risk of lung overexpansion injuries and decompression sickness. You'll learn more about this in sections 4 and 5. It's easiest to make safety stops with a reference, but you can make them without one by watching your depth on your computer while hovering, neutrally buoyant. Note that safety stops add conservatism, but you omit them during emergencies like assisting another diver or if you are very low on air. After all divers confirm they've completed their safety stop, swim gently upward to resume your ascent. Look up and reach up, like this, and rotate if necessary to check for obstructions. Keep a hand up as you surface, then inflate your BCD so you float comfortably before you switch to your snorkel. When boat diving, you usually signal the dive master that you're okay, then swim toward the boat if you're some distance away. You wear exposure suits for warmth and to provide some protection from accidental stings, scrapes, and cuts. The three primary types are wetsuits, dry suits, and skin suits, which are sometimes called bodysuits. You use wetsuits in water as cold as 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit to 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. They're made of foam neoprene. Water seeps into the suit and gets trapped, which is why they're called wetsuits. Afterward, your body heats the water, and the neoprene slows further heat loss significantly. A wetsuit has to fit properly because if it's too loose, water flows in and out, taking away body heat. Too tight and it's not comfortable. So, be sure to get a professional fitting. Dry suits cover most or all of your body, and you use them in water cooler than 18 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit, but also for very long dives in warmer water. As the name says, the suit keeps you dry. An undergarment and an air layer, and sometimes the suit itself, insulate you. Because a dry suit is an airspace, you equalize it and adjust it for buoyancy control when you change depths. You learn to do this in the PADI Dry Suit Diver course, and your instructor will familiarize you with dry suit operation if you use one in this course. Dry suits don't fit snugly, but size, fit, and options are still important. Skin suits provide some sting, cut, scrape, and sunburn protection, but little or no insulation. You wear them by themselves in very warm water, or under a partial wetsuit in moderately warm water. Many divers wear skin suits to help them put on wetsuits. Exposure suits come in different styles, and you can choose from different accessories and options. Wet and dry suits insulate you so effectively that overheating can be an issue when it's hot out. Avoid this by setting up your kit before putting on your suit, and put the suit on at the last possible moment. Stay in the shade if possible. Limit activity as much as you can, especially when you have to be in the sun. Pull back a hood and unzip the jacket for as long as possible. If you do start to overheat, stop and cool off, even if it holds up the dive a few minutes. You carry a cutting tool for safety, such as to deal with entanglement, and for convenience, such as to remove litter from a dive site. You can choose from 4 basic types, though some areas regulate the types and sizes of cutting devices. Dive knives range in size and usually have a smooth and serrated cutting edge. Dive tools are similar, but they replace the pointed tip with a prying tip. Shears are especially suited to cutting line and net. And Z-knives are bladed hooks specifically for cutting fishing net or line. You usually carry a Z-knife in addition to a regular knife or tool. You mount cutting tools in different places based on what you like, as shown. Wear at least one someplace you can reach it with either hand, so it's accessible even if you have an arm a bit tangled in something. You need a dive gear bag to carry all your equipment, except weights, cylinders, and dry suits. They're designed specifically for diving so that salt water won't ruin zippers, so the material won't rot, and so they can withstand the stresses carrying it. You can choose from many styles, options, and colors, which are mainly personal preference. The main thing to pay attention to is size. Select a bag that is slightly larger than what you think you will need, because your kit tends to grow as you gain experience. As a diver, there are 3 primary instruments you use: your SPG, dive computer, and compass. These may be separate instruments, or 2 or all 3 may integrate into a single one. You're already familiar with SPGs. Dive computers track your depth, time, and give you time limits. You'll learn about these in sections 4 and 5. Your compass gives directional information so you can find your way. You'll learn about doing this a bit later as well. Besides these, There are optional instruments. Before dive computers, divers used depth gauges and watches for use with dive tables. You will need these if you use the RDP table or ERDPML instead of a computer. Dive watches are popular lifestyle accessories, the badge of a diver, if you will. Many divers who have computers also have dive watches for that reason, as well as having another way to time their dives. Thermometers help you learn how much exposure protection to use. Although you can get a separate thermometer, your SPG or dive computer may already have one. Dive instruments are robust, but shield them from impact and don't drop them. Keep them out of prolonged exposure to direct sunlight and high heat. Other than rinsing instruments, the primary special care is changing the batteries as directed by the manufacturer. See the manufacturer literature for any additional requirements. You'll learn several ways to enter the water during this course. Depending upon your physical characteristics, one you may learn is the giant stride, which is popular when diving from large dive boats or from docks onto deep water. After your pre-dive safety check, with your buddy, go to the water entry area. To avoid walking with fins on, put on your fins there if you can. You can stabilize each other or hang on to something stable. Partially inflate your BCD. Check that the entry area is clear and confirm that your buddy's ready. Breathe from your regulator and hold it and your mask like this, so they don't get bumped out of place when you splash. You can hold your instruments and accessories with the other hand. However, some divers prefer to put it on the back of their head. Look straight ahead and take a big step into the water. Keep holding your mask and regulator until you're stable on the surface. Turn to the boat or dock, poolside in this case. Signal that you're okay and clear the area for your buddy. Boat diving, you typically wait on a line trailing from near the ladder or the stern if there's a bit of a current. You use a weight check at the surface to determine proper weighting. Starting with your estimated weight, breathe from your regulator and deflate your BCD completely. Holding a normal breath, you should float at eye level, and when you exhale, you should sink slowly. If not, add or remove weight until you do. Once you're there, if you're wearing a full cylinder, add about 2 kilograms or 5 pounds. This is because the air in your cylinder has weight, and you get lighter as you use it up. The 2 kilograms or 5 pounds offsets this weight change. Sometimes a BCD band is too loose and the cylinder starts to slip. If this happens before getting into the water, it's usually simplest to take the scuba kit off and readjust it. If a cylinder comes loose during the dive, it's not usually an emergency because it will stay with the diver. Find some sand or other insensitive bottom and have her turn face down, like this. Loosen the band enough to replace the cylinder. Then tighten and lock it. If it comes loose at the surface, you may be able to re-secure it by having the diver hold on to something while breathing from her snorkel or regulator. It's usually easiest if the diver has no more air in the BCD than necessary to float. If a cylinder slips loose while exiting the water, it is often easiest to ease back into the water, slip the kit off, and then lift it from the water like this. You'll practice taking your gear off in the water at the surface so you can do this. When your snorkel's out of your mouth at the surface, it fills with water. To clear it so you can breathe, blow forcefully like this to blast the water out. You'll hear this called the blast method. After clearing, inhale cautiously and use airway control to breathe past any residual water and blast again to get rid of it. Practice this with your face in the water, which is how you do it when you're keeping an eye on something below, or when in choppy waves that, for practical purposes, mean that your face is always in the water. You switch from your snorkel to your regulator, and your regulator to your snorkel on almost every dive. Again, practice this with your face in the water. Starting with your snorkel, take a breath, then exchange it for your regulator. Clear your regulator. After a few breaths, take a breath, go back to your snorkel, clear it, and breathe. Repeat this exchange until you can do it effortlessly. During Confined Water Dive 2, you'll begin developing your neutral buoyancy skills. One popular technique for starting out is the fin pivot. Lie face down on insensitive bottom, sand for example, if you're not in a pool. Relax, then breathe slowly and deeply. If you're approximately neutrally buoyant, you should pivot up on your fin tips as you inhale and down as you exhale. If you don't, add a small burst to your BCD and try again. Make small changes. Adding a lot of air risks a rapid ascent. Be patient. When you pivot up and down as you breathe, like this, you're about neutral. Once you know how to do this, start using neutral buoyancy as your normal state while diving. For example, if you need to clear your mask, instead of kneeling, clear it in mid-water or with just light fin tip contact, in a more horizontal position. Like this. Although the fin pivot is popular, your instructor may have you use a different technique. Confined Water Dive 2 continues your mask clearing skills. You'll start by clearing a fully flooded mask, which you do just like a partially flooded one, like this. Then, you take off your mask completely. This prepares you in case it were to get dislodged completely while diving. If you're not wearing contacts, keep your eyes open. Everything will be blurry, but you'll see well enough to swim, signal your buddy, and so on. If you find it uncomfortable to breathe with your nose exposed to water at first, block it momentarily if necessary. But with a little practice, you'll be able to breathe without a mask and without blocking it. You'll practice doing this for a minute or more, which is about how long it would take to reach the surface if you lost your mask and couldn't find it. After a minute, put it back on and clear it. Then, check the seal for trapped hair or your hood under it, which would allow an annoying drizzle until corrected. A rare but possible malfunction is for your BCD or dry suit inflator to stick open. Respond by disconnecting it and venting the excess air. To start the exercise, your instructor may simulate the sticking by holding down the inflation button. Immediately disconnect the hose from the inflator, like this. It takes more effort with your regulator pressurized. Push the hose toward the connection, like this, while pulling back on the release fitting with your fingers. If you can't disconnect quickly, get relatively vertical and hold open the exhaust, like this, so you can keep your buoyancy under control while continuing to disconnect the hose. After you're finished practicing, be sure to reconnect the inflator hose. During Confined Water Dive 3, you'll learn to inflate your BCD without low pressure inflation from your cylinder. You're better able to respond appropriately if you know what it feels like to run out of air. Your instructor will simulate this by closing your cylinder valve while you breathe and watch your SPG. Note that the pressure drops with each breath, and you'll feel breathing become noticeably difficult. When you can't get a breath, signal "out of air" and your instructor will reopen your valve. You'll see your SPG return to its previous reading and you can resume breathing. Good divers know their approximate remaining air at all times. To help you develop this ability, at times your instructor will, without prior notice, ask you to signal your air pressure without rechecking your SPG, after which you'll check together. If you're managing your air supply and monitoring your SPG as you should be within 20 bar or 300 psi. One of the exits you may learn is the ladder exit. This is a common technique when diving from larger boats. Surface near but not too close to the ladder area. If there's another diver ahead of you, don't get right under her. The diver could fall back in, or her cylinder could slip loose. If there's a current, you usually have a line to hang on to until it's your turn. When it is, approach the ladder and grab it firmly. Keep your mask on so you can see above and below the surface, and switch back to your regulator so you can breathe if you were to fall back in. Then, while keeping contact with the ladder, hand up any accessories, then remove and hand up your fins. Some divers slip adjustable fins onto their wrists, like this, so they have them to swim with if they lose their grip and get pushed away by the current. Breathe from your regulator until you're all the way aboard, and immediately take a seat and have a buddy help you get your gear off. Depending upon the boat, the ladder, surface conditions, and your physical characteristics, you may hand up your weights or your entire scuba kit before climbing the ladder. Some divers can't climb ladders at all and use different exit techniques.
One thing that makes diving popular is that you can enjoy it in so many different environments, each with characteristics that make it special. Besides coral reefs and temperate ocean, diving's popular in lakes, reservoirs, springs, flooded quarries, rivers, and human-made dive sites. In all of them, 6 environmental conditions affect you as a diver, though how and the extent depend on the environment. In most environments, temperature varies seasonally, but water also tends to form temperature layers, getting colder as you go deeper. The depth at which you find colder water depends on the environment, season, and water motion. What's important is to wear exposure protection based on your planned depth. Visibility can range from just a meter or a few feet to more than 30 meters or 100 feet. It's usually defined as how far you can recognize a diver horizontally. Like a dust storm in air, lots of particles in the water reduce the visibility. Water movement, weather, plankton, and the bottom composition can all contribute to suspended particles and lower visibility. Lower visibility doesn't necessarily mean a poor dive. What you see is more important than how far. But lower visibility can make it harder to stay with buddies, so stay close, take your time, and watch each other. Navigation usually requires more attention, and it's easier to get disoriented while descending and ascending. As you've learned, it's easiest to descend and ascend along the bottom or a line, and this is especially true in lower visibility. But you can use your dive computer to watch your depth if you don't have a reference. If the visibility is so poor that you wouldn't have fun, it's usually best to not make the dive or end it if you've already started. Clear water can cause disorientation too. Again, a reference helps. You can also get too far from your buddy even though you can see each other. Remember to stay close. The 2 types of water movement that affect you as a diver are waves and current. We'll look at how waves affect diving later in this section. Currents affect diving because you can't swim against any but a very weak one. so you need to use the appropriate techniques. Because they're often strongest at the surface and weakest near the bottom, plan a dive in a current so you avoid long surface swims. Begin your dive swimming into a mild current. That way, when you turn the dive, the current helps carry you toward your exit point rather than pushing you away from it. Especially on the surface, don't swim against anything but a very weak current. Doing so can exhaust you. Swim across the current to reach shore, to reach a line trailed behind the dive boat for this purpose, or to get out of the current, depending upon the situation. When boat diving, if you can't get to the boat due to a current, remain calm, stay with your buddy, inflate your BCD, and use your signaling devices to get the boat to pick you up. Drift diving helps you deal with currents by letting you float with them. It's an exhilarating way to dive that's popular where strong oceanic currents prevail. You can learn the techniques in the PADI Drift Diver course. The bottom composition may be silt or mud, sand, rock, coral, or vegetation, with more than one common at most dive sites. Regardless of type, avoid bottom contact as much as possible so you don't stir it up and reduce the visibility, to help avoid cuts and stings, and so you don't damage aquatic life. Stay neutrally buoyant with your gear streamlined well above the bottom. If you must contact the bottom, choose a place without sensitive aquatic life and hazards, and settle onto it gently, ideally with little more than fin tip contact. When you're close to the bottom, watch where you put your hands and feet. When wading in or out during a shore dive, some bottom contact is unavoidable. If necessary where you're diving, wear wetsuit boots to reduce the risk of cuts from rocks or stings from stepping on aquatic life. Wade just deep enough to start swimming. Sunlight affects how much light you have underwater, but it can also cause sunburn, perhaps the most common injury divers get. But it's easy to avoid. Use sunscreen and stay in the shade when you can. Cover up with clothing and remember that you can still burn when it's overcast. Repeated long-term exposure to bright sunlight can damage your eyes, so protect them with good quality sunglasses. There's great diving in both freshwater and saltwater. Your skills apply to both, but a few differences generally apply. Freshwater is less dense and you don't need as much weight, so check proper weighting when going from salt to freshwater or vice versa. Marine environments tend to have more aquatic life and more water motion, waves, currents, and tides. Freshwater environments are more likely to have bottoms that stir up easily and have distinct cold water layers as you go deeper within the recreational depth range. As a diver, you develop the ability to assess dive conditions. You learn to do this from your instructor, other divers, and experience, so that you can assess dive conditions based on the weather, season, water motion, how the water looks, reports online or from other divers, and dives you've made at similar sites. Your assessment includes deciding whether or not to dive. If you have a concern, get more information about how to handle it if you can. If you can't address the issue, then go elsewhere or dive another day. Remember that ultimately, you decide to dive. You are responsible for your own safety, so only you can make the final decision to dive. As discussed in Section 1, an environmental orientation helps you learn to address what's unique to an environment. You learn to assess conditions and to eliminate potential concerns. Orientations improve your safety, but they also make your diving more interesting, rewarding, and enjoyable. Every diver has limits. Whether you're new or very experienced, dive within your limits. This means you don't exceed your training and your experience limits. It also means you stay within your comfort limits. This is important because data suggests that failure to dive within personal limits contributes to incidents and accidents. It does this because Some forms of diving may have hazards that may not be obvious. It takes training to recognize and avoid them. It can cause false security. Sometimes, if nothing goes wrong, a diver exceeds limits, like entering some wrecks without proper training or gear, and gets away with it. Unfortunately, this encourages doing it again. When a problem arises, though, the diver is completely unprepared to deal with it. Anxiety can cause divers to neglect potential problems. This happens when divers know they've exceeded their limits and focus on that so much it distracts them from other concerns. Expand your limits by continuing your education and gradually gaining experience. Don't let peer pressure influence you to dive beyond your limits or comfort. Suggest a more conservative dive, or dive with another buddy who will dive within your limits. This is not only the better choice for safety, but you'll enjoy yourself more because you can dive with confidence instead of worry. The unique life you see underwater is one of diving's special appeals. It may be your main reason for diving. Most aquatic organisms are fascinating, beautiful, and harmless. As a diver, your interactions can be passive or active. Generally, interact passively, which means leaving aquatic life undisturbed. Swim slowly and smoothly, sensitive to the underwater world around you. The less you disturb, the more you see. Active interactions are those that directly affect aquatic organisms. Some, like touching, moving, or frightening them, are harmful and should be avoided. Some active interactions are reasonable, but more may be harmful, even when that's not what you intend. So keep your interactions passive. Most animals you see are harmless, but a few can injure you. Broadly, we can group these as those that can sting and/or puncture, and those that can bite. Those that can sting or puncture include jellyfish, fire coral and their relatives, spined fish like lionfish and scorpionfish, stingrays, sea urchins, and cone shells. Those that bite include moray eels, sharks, barracuda, octopuses, and lobsters, and crab. Most aquatic life injuries result from a diver being careless and provoking a defense reaction. You can greatly reduce the risk of aquatic life injuries by treating all organisms with respect. Stay well off the bottom, wear an exposure suit and gloves if allowed in the area, and watch where you put your hands and feet. Don't touch aquatic animals, particularly those you don't recognize. If you see a potentially aggressive animal, like a large shark, remain still and calm, on or near the bottom. Don't swim toward it, but keep an eye on it. Chances are it's just passing through. But if it appears aggressive or too curious for your comfort, calmly swim to your exit on the bottom and leave the water. Most aquatic life injuries are mild, but can range from annoying to life-threatening. In all cases, give priority to breathing, providing CPR, and controlling severe bleeding as needed. Provide first aid and seek emergency medical care for clearly serious injuries, severe reactions, or those that don't respond to treatment. You learn more about these types of emergencies in the PADI Rescue Diver and Emergency First Response Primary and Secondary Care courses. When it comes to injuries by aquatic life, you normally think of animals, but kelp and other vegetation can have some hazard potential. The primary one is entanglement, so keep your kit streamlined and stay out of dense growth areas. If you get snagged, back up, but don't turn. That tends to make things worse by wrapping it around you. Get your buddy to help free you if necessary. Shore diving is popular and your only option in some places. Begin a shore dive by evaluating conditions and planning the dive with your buddies. Typically, you gear up with everything except your mask, fins, and snorkel. Then, walk to the water and put on your mask and snorkel before you enter. You may wade in and back out. But in some locations, you may enter with a giant stride from a dock and exit up a ladder, or use stairs to and from the water. If you wade in from shore, pay attention to bottom composition and hazardous or fragile aquatic life you might step on. Wearing foot protection may be wise. A common technique is to wade until you reach water deep enough in which to swim and then put your fins on. Then, depending on the dive site, you may descend and swim out on the bottom, or swim on the surface and descend along a float line. Generally, you ascend and exit by reversing these steps. Keep in mind that you can't wade in some environments, so you need to reach water deep enough in which to swim some other way. And when planning your dive, remember to plan to save enough air to use during your exit. Some dive sites require entering through mild surf. As a new diver, this means entering on a gently sloped beach with waves about waist high or less. Understanding water motion principles will help you enter through mild surf. Waves break, that is, form surf, in water slightly deeper than their own height. The bottom drags and then they tip over. So by noting where waves break, you can get an idea of the depth. Waves cause surge and undertow. Surge is a back and forth motion caused by waves passing overhead. The main concern is to not let it push you against rocks or anything hazardous. As you get deeper, surge dissipates. Undertow is water from breaking waves flowing back to sea under the incoming waves. The larger the waves and steeper the beach, the stronger the undertow. The main concern is that it can cause you to lose your balance, but in mild surf, it isn't very strong. Waves usually approach shore at an angle, which causes a longshore current. A longshore current flows parallel to the shoreline and tends to move you downshore during the dive. You can plan for this by swimming into the current during the dive or planning to exit somewhere downshore. Sometimes, waves push over an obstruction that blocks water from flowing back to sea on the bottom. When this happens, the water may funnel seaward through a narrow opening. Past the opening, the flow dissipates. This is called a rip current. Rip currents can be alarming because they carry you away from the shore rapidly, and they're too strong to swim against. Most accidents involving rip currents result from panic, not the current. If you get in one, don't fight it. Inflate your BCD and swim at a sustainable pace across it until you're clear. Then swim back to shore. Some areas may have recommendations specific to local rip currents. A wind blowing from shore can push surface water out to sea. This causes an upwelling, which is deeper water rising to replace the surface water. Upwellings tend to make dive conditions clearer but cooler, so you may need more exposure protection. The moon and the sun's gravities pull on the oceans, causing a slight bulge. As the Earth turns, this causes the tides, a rise and fall in the sea level. Tides cause currents, especially when they flow in and out of a narrow area, affect the depth, and can change the visibility. Tidal changes range from significant to unpredictable, but they're very predictable. Generally, the best time to dive is at high tide. You can find local tide times and heights online or with an app. If the tide changes are significant, ask a local dive professional for an orientation to local techniques. Now let's look at the techniques you use to enter through mild surf. Start by watching where the waves break and their pattern, so you enter when waves are absent or at their smallest. Enter with everything in place except your fins, breathing from your regulator, and have just enough air in your BCD to float. With your buddy, wade quickly to deeper water. When a wave comes, stand like this for stability, and so your mask and regulator don't get dislodged. If you're using a float, tow it behind you. In water deep enough to swim, pull on your fins and surface swim out. The idea is to pass through the surf as quickly as you can. Switch to your snorkel to save air if you're going to surface swim a bit before descending. At the end of the dive, surface outside the surf zone. Check the wave pattern and time your entry for a lull. When ready, switch to your regulator and swim shoreward on the surface with your buddy. In water shallow enough in which to wade, deflate your BCD so you can stand and walk firmly. Watching the waves, remove your fins and wade ashore quickly. Brace as waves pass like you did before. If you stumble and waves make it hard to get up, don't try. Just crawl until you're almost out, then get your buddy to help you up. As a diver, you'll almost certainly dive from a boat. To prepare for a boat dive, inspect your gear ahead of time and be sure it's marked so it doesn't get mixed with someone else's. Space will be limited, so pack so you can work in and out of your bag. Put what you need last on the bottom and what you need first on top. Take what you want for your time aboard: dry clothes, beverages and snacks, sunscreen, towels, and so on. Prepare yourself by being well rested and properly fed, but also by taking steps to prevent seasickness. Seasickness rarely has long-term health effects, but it can ruin your trip. Suitable medication is available over the counter in most areas, but consult your physician if you have questions about what's appropriate for you. Underway, stay in open, fresh air and look at the horizon. If you start to feel ill, don't go into the head, you'll feel worse, and stay away from engine exhaust. If you think you're going to be sick, as a precaution, take someone with you and go to the leeward rail. Arrive for a boat dive well ahead of the departure time and stow your gear as the crew directs. Charter dive vessels usually have a roll call before departure. This is important for your safety because they will call roll or use some other procedure after each dive to be sure everyone's aboard. Follow whatever procedure the crew uses. Boat rides can take minutes or hours. If the ride's very short, you may gear up before the boat leaves dock. More commonly, though, you set up your kit, but wait until you reach or near the dive site to plan the dive with your buddy, get into your suit, and gear up. After setting up your gear and checking for a full cylinder, close the cylinder valve and purge the regulator until you get to the site. Be careful moving around carrying or wearing gear. It's easy to lose your balance on a rocking boat. Be sure to secure your equipment, even if you just step away for a moment. Waves or even boat wake can cause it to fall and injure someone, to break something, or to go overboard. Most dive boats have racks and bungees for this purpose. If not, lay your kit on the cylinder and block it so it can't roll or slide. At the dive site, the dive master briefs everyone about the site, including what's interesting to see, possible hazards, conditions, and other information you and your buddies will want for planning your dive. If it's the day's first dive, it may also cover general diving procedures, safety issues, and other information that doesn't have to be repeated. It usually includes the diver emergency recall signal. Be sure you know what the signal is and what you should do if you hear it. After the briefing, check conditions and the current direction. After making or reviewing your dive plan, you're ready to kit up and get in. Diving from small boats, you may gear up, perform your pre-dive safety check, and back roll in. Or you may float your kit and get into it after you get in. On large dive boats, you typically get into your kit seated. Put on everything except your fins and conduct your pre-dive safety check with your buddy. Then, go to the entry area and let the dive master know you're ready to go in. Put on your fins, get a buddy or hold on to something for balance, and give the dive master any special equipment you need him to hand you after you're in the water. The crew will usually recommend an entry technique suited to the boat, the conditions, and your physical characteristics. The best entry is usually the easiest one. Diving from a boat, depending upon conditions in the depth, you follow a line to the bottom. At many sites, you then follow the bottom deeper to your planned depth, swimming into the current as you already learned. When you or a buddy reaches a time, air, or other limit, you turn the dive and head back. When you reach the line, use it as an ascent reference and make your safety stop next to it, or hang on a bar or separate line many boats put over the side. As you pass under or alongside the boat, stay well away from the boat propellers. Do not approach or get near them, even when the engine is not running. Boat propellers can inflict catastrophic injuries, often fatal, with little warning. So treat them as though they will start turning at full force at any time. After your safety stop, surface in front of or next to the boat. Make yourself buoyant and signal the crew that you're okay. If there's no current, you may surface at the boat's ladder. If you have to surface away from the boat due to low air or to find it because you became disoriented, watch for boat traffic. Use your surface signaling devices to make yourself more visible if appropriate. Do not swim just below the surface. You're not visible to boats and could be hit by one. Either be at the surface and visible, or deep enough to be safely below boat traffic. How you exit the water into a boat varies. On larger dive boats, it's common to use the ladder exit you saw in Section 2. Diving from small boats, you usually don't have a suitable ladder, so it's common to get out of your gear in the water, climb aboard, and then pull up your gear. Keep your fins on if they'll help you exit. If physical limitations keep you from climbing a ladder, you can usually use this technique just as well diving from a large boat. You use lines to dive in mild to moderate current without getting swept behind the boat. After your pre-dive safety check, you typically enter the water. Then pull yourself along the swim line to the mooring or anchor line. Use the mooring or anchor line to maintain your place as you descend. You may have to go down hand over hand. Typically, the current will be weaker on the bottom. Swim into it for your dive. For your ascent, return to the mooring or anchor line and ascend along it. Make your safety stop, then ascend to the swim line. Follow the swim line to the ladder or trail line. Hang on to the trail line until it's your turn to exit. If you lose contact with a line and can't regain hold in the current, surface and swim quickly across the current to intercept the trail line. Should you miss the trail line, inflate your BCD, signal the crew to be picked up, and deploy your surface signaling devices. Relax. It may be a bit before all other divers are aboard and they can come after you. The crew may advise you of other procedures they use for diving in currents. It's highly unlikely, but if you surface and the boat's not in sight, stay calm, establish buoyancy, and wait to get picked up. The boat may have slipped from its mooring or anchor, or the captain may be dealing with an emergency. If there is a mooring or anchored float in place, hang on to it. Deploy your surface signaling devices so it's easier for the boat to locate you when it returns. If the shore and a reasonable exit is close enough that you can realistically expect to reach it without becoming exhausted, swim slowly toward it. Generally, dive planning has 4 stages. Advanced planning is the decision to go diving. You decide on a buddy, choose a dive site, agree on an objective, schedule logistics, and generally check dive conditions, as well as weather, surf, tides, and so on. Start preparation planning a day or more before you go. Inspect your gear and have your cylinder filled if necessary. Recheck conditions if it has been several days since you last checked, and start packing your gear as appropriate. Last-minute preparation is what you do right before you head out. Recheck conditions if appropriate for last-minute changes. Let someone know where you're going, including when you expect to return, what to do if you're late, and your mobile number. Gather personal items that you want with you, like your certification card, sunscreen, smartphone or tablet, beverages, and so on. Pack your gear bag with anything left remaining, and double-check that you're not forgetting anything. Pre-dive planning is the actual dive plan based on what you find at the site. You want to anticipate, discuss, and plan for as much as reasonably possible. Evaluate whether conditions are acceptable. Take as much time as you need. If not, find another site or cancel the dive. Agree on techniques, including where and how to enter and exit in your course. Review signals and communications as needed. Agree on buddy separation procedures and on time, depth, and air supply limits. You should also discuss what to do if an emergency arises. The dive planning slate has prompts to help you with pre-dive planning. Diving's safety record is better than many other sports and activities, but it still has hazards and risks. You can't breathe water, so common sense tells us that being in and underwater presents some hazards and risks. And you've learned some of the risks associated with breathing compressed air. Much of what you learn as a new diver helps you reduce and manage risk. But like most things in life, you can't eliminate it entirely. To reduce the likelihood of problems, dive within your limits. Stay fit and keep your skills sharp. Follow safe diving guidelines, have the recommended equipment, and do as you've been trained, even when it doesn't seem necessary. Remember that under stress, you tend to do what you do by habit, so maintain habits that help you prevent and deal with problems. You're human, so you will make mistakes. Following proper procedures and having required equipment helps offset this by providing a margin for error. With proper diving habits and equipment, you'll have fewer problems, and the ones you do have will usually be small. You'll be better prepared to handle problems quickly and effectively. The next subsection introduces you to basic problem management, but consider that continuing your diver education expands and refines what you'll learn in this course. For instance, it's recommended that you complete the PADI Rescue Diver and Emergency Oxygen Provider courses, as well as Emergency First Response primary and secondary care training, especially if you plan to dive away from immediate assistance by paramedics, lifeguards, and professional dive guides. Most diver in distress situations occur at the surface. You can prevent or control most of these by doing what you've been taught. Diving within your limits, relaxing while you dive, and establishing and maintaining positive buoyancy when you're on the surface. If you have a problem on the surface, immediately make yourself buoyant. Inflate your BCD or drop your weights. Stop, think, and then act. Ask for help if you need it. That often avoids a small problem becoming a big one. If you need to help a diver at the surface, you have to recognize that he needs help and his state of mind. Divers who are in control, not panicked, usually signal or ask for assistance. They appear relatively relaxed and move with controlled, deliberate actions. They usually respond to and follow instructions, keep their gear in place, and make themselves buoyant. Divers out of control, panicked, act instinctively out of fear instead of using deliberate, controlled actions based on their training. They will struggle violently and expend tremendous energy staying at the surface, even until becoming exhausted. They typically don't establish buoyancy, but will climb on anything or anyone to keep from sinking. They reject their masks and mouthpieces, have wide, unseeing eyes, don't follow instructions, and have quick, jerky movements. Panicked divers need immediate help because they may struggle until exhausted, then be at risk of sinking and drowning. Follow 4 steps when you help another diver. First, establish buoyancy for yourself and the diver. Ideally, throw or extend something that floats. If you must make contact to help, first make yourself buoyant, then inflate his BCD or drop his weights. Second, calm the diver by reassuring him. And third, help the diver establish breathing control. Have him breathe slowly and deeply to encourage relaxation. If possible and appropriate, give him a chance to recover before doing anything else. Finally, assist the diver to the boat or shore. Even divers in control may need help due to leg cramps or other problems. You'll practice diver toes during training. An unresponsive diver at the surface may have inhaled water, blacked out due to fatigue and exhaustion, had a heart attack, suffered a lung overexpansion injury, or have some other serious condition. He needs immediate help. The primary concerns are to check for breathing and to begin rescue breathing if it's needed. A diver who's floating face down at the surface may be resting or watching what's underwater, but he could be unresponsive. Good buddy communication avoids confusion, but check responsiveness if a diver floats motionless like this for more than a few moments. Assume a diver who floats in an odd position or who panics and then stops moving to be unresponsive. To assist an unresponsive diver, establish buoyancy for yourself and the victim. Call for help to the boat or shore. Check for breathing and provide rescue breathing if he's not breathing. Finally, get the victim out of the water while continuing rescue breaths if they're needed. We'll look at what you do after you get out shortly. Again, you prevent or control most underwater problems by doing what you've been learning. Relax while you dive. Plan your air use with your buddy and watch it closely. And dive within your experience and training limits. You've learned about overexertion previously, but let's review it because it's a common underwater problem. You help prevent overexertion by staying relaxed, breathing slowly and deeply. Avoid strenuous activity. If you start to overexert, you may feel air-starved if you demand air faster than your regulator can supply it. If it happens, don't ignore the feeling. Remember that you stop, hang on to something that you wouldn't harm if you can, like a piece of dead coral in this case. Relax, breathe slowly until you catch your breath, then continue at a reduced pace, or abort the dive if necessary. Your scuba regulator is designed so that if it fails, it free flows like this, rather than cutting off your air. You can breathe from a free-flowing regulator, but don't seal your mouth on it, partly because there's some risk of lung overexpansion injury if the flow's high, but mainly because it may come out of your mouth or flood your mask. Instead, press it to the outside of your lips like this, letting the excess escape. Insert one end of the mouthpiece if it helps, then breathe the air you need by sipping it from the flow, somewhat like drinking from a water fountain. Start up promptly because a free flow will exhaust your air supply quickly, but ascend at a safe rate. Obviously, have the regulator professionally serviced before using it again. You'll practice this skill during Confined Water Dive 4. In the aquatic plant discussion, you learn that entanglement is rare. Fishing line, loose line off a reel, and old fishing nets can entangle, but you can usually avoid the problem by moving slowly, being alert, watching where you're going, and keeping your kit streamlined. If you do get entangled, it's not usually an emergency if you have adequate air. Don't turn or twist. That wraps line around you. Stop, think, and then calmly and slowly disentangle yourself. Get your buddy to help, and if you're severely entangled or low on air, carefully use your cutting tool if that's faster. In rare, extreme cases, you may have to slip out of your scuba kit to clear it, which you'll practice during your confined water training dives. You've already learned a lot about low air and out of air situations. Planning air use, including a reserve and watching your SPG, usually prevents them. Always head up while you still have enough air for a proper ascent. It's better to have a long surface swim than to run out of air underwater. In the event of an out-of-air situation, you have 4 options. 1 is to make a normal ascent when you still have some air, but feel significant breathing resistance. You get more air as the surrounding pressure drops, so breathe lightly and make a controlled, continuous ascent, no safety stop, to the surface. An alternate air source ascent is your best all-around choice. You're already familiar with this, and you practice it many times during training. If you're not as close to your buddy as you should be, have no independent alternate air source, and are 6 to 9 meters or 20 to 30 feet or shallower, a controlled emergency swimming ascent, or CESA, is another response. Simply look up and swim to the surface, making an ah sound to assure that you exhale to avoid lung overexpansion injury. You will learn this first by swimming horizontally in confined water with your instructor. Ascend at a safe rate. Keep your regulator in your mouth and keep all your gear in place. You'll learn more in the Your Skills as a Diver section. You would use a buoyant emergency ascent if you were too far from your buddy, had no other alternate air source, and were so deep that you don't think you'd make it to the surface any other way. Ascend just as in a controlled emergency swimming ascent, except drop your weights. You'll exceed a safe ascent rate, but that's better than staying on the bottom. Make an ah sound and flare out your arms and legs as you near the surface to slow down. When you reach the surface in any out-of-air situation, your low-pressure inflator won't work. If necessary, establish buoyancy by dropping your weights or inflate your BCD orally. An unresponsive diver underwater is a serious emergency. The priority is to get the victim to the surface. Use her BCD or drop her weights if necessary. Hold her regulator in if it's in place, but if not, don't waste time putting it back. Ascend at a safe rate, keeping yourself safe because you can't help someone if you're in trouble. If you lose control of the victim, let her rise to the surface ahead of you. At the surface, follow the procedures you saw earlier. Unresponsiveness is unconsciousness or being unable to respond or act coherently. Near drowning, pressure-related injuries, and medical conditions like a heart attack can cause difficulty breathing, unconsciousness, unclear thinking, visual problems, paralysis, chest pain, lowered alertness, cardiac and respiratory arrest. Once out of the water, your priorities for helping someone who is or was unresponsive are: assure breathing. Keep the airway open. Continually monitor breathing. Provide CPR if necessary. Contact emergency care. First, the local emergency medical system, then the local diver emergency service like the Divers Alert Network if there is one for the area. Keep a breathing, unresponsive diver lying level with his left side down. If the victim becomes responsive, keep him lying down. Administer emergency oxygen and maintain his temperature by protecting him from heat or cold. Continue providing care until emergency medical help arrives. If you can't accompany the diver to medical care, write down as much information about the dive and the diver as possible. This isn't an accident report, so provide only information like the dive profile, the emergency care provided, emergency contact information, and known medical conditions. Write only facts. Don't speculate or guess. Anyone who has been unresponsive underwater or in water should have a medical examination. Some conditions, like near drowning, can have serious delayed effects that are potentially fatal. These can occur more than 24 hours later, even in someone who appears fully recovered. Let's look at your options for surface signaling devices. You should have at least two: an audible device that attracts attention with noise, and a visual device that makes it easier to see you from a distance. Whistles are the most common audible devices. Attach yours here, where it's out of the way but easy to use in an emergency. Low-pressure horns use your cylinder air. They're very loud, but have a regular whistle too in case your cylinder's empty. Inflatable signal tubes fit in your pocket, yet stand a meter or 3 feet or more out of the water when deployed. They make it much easier to see you, especially in rough conditions. Delayed surface marker buoys, DSMBs, do the same job. The main difference is that you can deploy them from underwater. Signal mirrors get attention by reflecting the sun. They're useful for signaling aircraft as well as boats. Signal lights and flashers designed for diving are good options for night diving. You may use a dive float when shore diving, or when going some distance from a boat. Dive floats give you something to rest on, mark dive sites, help carry accessories, provide emergency flotation, and support dive flags. The best type depends on what uses you have in mind. Tow a dive float with line on a proper reel. Loose line poses an entanglement hazard. Tow by hand so you simply let go if a boat or something entangles the line. Dive flags alert boaters and other watercraft to your presence. The traditional dive flag indicates that divers are below and boats should stay clear. Many areas require it when diving in navigable waters. The alpha flag indicates that a vessel has divers in the water and can't maneuver. Generally, it is only required to be used by boats, but some regions use it for all diving activities and fly them from the surface floats. Some areas require both flags. Your instructor will tell you which applies where you're diving. Fly a flag so it's visible from at least 100 meters or yards. Local laws may stipulate how close you have to stay to it and how far boaters must stay away. If not, the general rule is for divers to stay within 15 meters or 50 feet and boaters to stay 30 to 60 meters or 100 to 200 feet. Don't assume every boater recognizes dive flags. If a boat sounds loud and close, stay deep enough to be safe until it passes. You've seen several entries you may learn during the course. Another you may learn is the seated back roll. It's useful from small boats and swim steps that are close to the water. After your pre-dive safety check, sit at the edge, facing away from the water with your cylinder out over the surface, like this. Partially inflate your BCD. Breathe from your regulator and hold your mask. After your buddy confirms the area is clear, tuck your chin and lean back until your weight naturally rolls you in. Hold your mask until you bob back up. Then signal you're okay and clear the area for your buddy's entry. Besides dropping weights in an emergency, you need to be able to remove and replace your weights to make adjustments or for some entry and exit methods. Your instructor will show you the appropriate technique for your equipment, but here are some points that may apply to most systems. When removing weights, be careful not to drop them. Your buddy may help you, or you may hand them to a boat crew or someone on a dock. Before donning weights in the water, be sure you have ample buoyancy, and you may want to switch from snorkel to regulator so you can breathe in any position as you position the weight. With many weight-integrated BCDs, it helps to turn face up so the pouches slide into place, but this varies. Using a weight belt, hold the free end so weights don't slip off the end, and replace it with the loop method, like this. Cramps are painful involuntary muscle contractions. In diving, They're most common in the feet and legs. If you get a cramp, stop, signal your buddy, and let the muscle rest. Gently stretch and massage the muscle. Use your fin, like this. If your buddy has a cramp, you can help by giving her something to press against, like this. Wait a few minutes after the cramp subsides before continuing at a slower pace. After learning basic buoyancy control, the next level is hovering. Establish neutral buoyancy, then gently push off the bottom, like this. You should hover without using your hands and fins, rising and sinking a bit as you inhale and exhale. You can control your position a bit by slightly raising or lowering how deeply you breathe, but don't hold your breath. It may take some practice to get the knack. Your instructor will have you work on this until you can hover for at least 30 seconds. After you're properly weighted and neutrally buoyant, you check and adjust your trim, your balance in the water. With your buddy, swim slowly in midwater. Pause and relax to see how your body wants to orient itself. Ideally, you want to trim yourself so you tend to stay in a relatively horizontal, face-down position, like this. If your feet rise or sink significantly, or if you roll face up, your instructor will help you reposition your weight and gear for a better trim. This is something you'll gradually learn to adjust from one dive to the next. The Peak Performance Buoyancy course further refines these skills beyond what you master in this course. Ask your instructor or visit PADI.com for more information. Once you've experienced air depletion and practiced alternate air source use, you'll put them together. When it becomes hard to breathe after your instructor closes the valve, signal for air. Secure your buddy's alternate air source and switch to it. Your instructor will reopen your valve so you can use your own if you need to for some reason. After a few breaths and getting settled, swim with your buddy for at least a minute sharing air. This gives you practice in sharing air and staying together while swimming for about as long as it might typically take to reach the surface in a real emergency. Your instructor will have you finish by actually ascending to the surface. Orally inflate your BCD to simulate not having air for low pressure inflation. Keep using the alternate air source until you're buoyant. You'll begin practicing the Controlled Emergency Swimming Ascent, or CESA, in Confined Water Dive 3. Previously, you learned that you simply look up, reach up, and swim up, making an ah sound. Keep all your gear in place. Since confined water isn't very deep, you'll do this with your instructor horizontally. So for practice, as you swim horizontally, think of ahead as up. Your instructor will be beside or beneath you and signal when to start. Reach out and look ahead and make a steady ah sound as you swim at 18 meters or 60 feet per minute. Don't rush. You should be able to go at least 9 meters or 30 feet. After you've mastered this in confined water, you'll get to practice in open water with your instructor using a line for safety and control.
You use mesh utility bags as multi-purpose containers for bulky stuff that's hard to hang on to underwater. You'll use them for tasks like underwater cleanups, or project-aware dive against debris activities, or carrying small loose items on a dive. They're also useful for carrying wet items after diving, like exposure suits. See your local dive center for choices best suited to what you have in mind. An important point: hand carry a loaded mesh utility bag while diving, so you can let go of it if it tangles or weighs you down. You use a slate or wet book for communication, writing down dive information, and so on. You can choose from different sized slates. Pick one you can pocket easily. Wet books use waterproof paper and offer more room for writing. Most are about this size, and because they flex, fit comfortably in exposure suit thigh pockets. When you night dive in the Advanced Open Water Diver course, you obviously need a dive light, but many divers find one useful during the day. Larger lights are more powerful and have longer burn times, though technology advances have made even the larger lights more compact. Ask your dive professional for assistance in choosing different battery, power, and size options. After choosing a light, you'll want a clip so you can attach it to your BCD, and a wrist lanyard so you don't lose it in use. You will start your dive log as part of your training. Many divers like the time-proven PADI dive log, but there are many other sizes and styles of dive logs to choose from. Also, you can go with an online, tablet, or PC e-log. Many dive computers download to programs like these, making logging convenient. Your dive log provides an experience record you'll use for continuing your education, and it's a good place to record emergency information, dive buddy phone numbers and email addresses, equipment serial numbers, and so on. For each dive, you want to record the date, dive site, depth, duration, buddy name or names, and usually your objective, and some notes or a description of anything significant that happened. Your log also provides a resource for sharing information with others at Scuba Earth and on other online sites. Dive planning software helps you plan your air use and determine your allowable dive times. The most popular versions operate in your smartphone or tablet, though you can get personal computer programs. Some versions interface with your dive computer and also include e-log functions. Since a missing O-ring or torn strap can make you miss a dive, most divers have a spare parts kit. It's simply a collection of user-replaceable items and tools like these in a sturdy box you keep in your gear bag. In setting up your spare parts kit, start with these basics, but choose a box somewhat larger than you need. As you gain experience, you'll add to the kit, so leave some space for these, but don't overload it with things you don't actually use. You dive relaxed, but like any sport, diving can be physically strenuous, such as when walking in your gear, swimming in a current, or when responding to an emergency. So, stay reasonably fit with a regular exercise program approved by your physician. Eat well, get adequate rest, and keep immunizations current. It's also a good idea to have a physical examination regularly. Like any physical activity, diver stresses put demands on your heart and cardiovascular system. This can happen lifting and carrying gear due to heat stress from wearing exposure suits in the sun, and so on. These factors can cause heart attacks in predisposed individuals, and they can be issues for other cardiovascular conditions. If you have or may have increased cardiovascular risk, be sure to discuss it with your physician. Never use alcohol or tobacco prior to diving. If you drink, use moderation the night before diving. Some drugs can create problems while diving, so be cautious and consult your physician if you're unsure whether you can use a particular drug. You want to be in good physical health when diving. If you feel ill, cancel the dive. Dive again when you're well, and as you've already learned, don't use medications to eliminate symptoms and dive while you're sick. Diving is supposed to be fun, and you enjoy it by diving when healthy. Like in any activity, you keep your dive skills and knowledge sharp by using them and by diving regularly. If you can't get to open water, practice in a pool with a buddy. Staying up to date includes interacting with other divers and online communities like Scuba Earth because it helps you keep up with current trends and practices. If you go more than 6 months without diving, see your PADI instructor about refreshing your knowledge and skills in the Scuba Review program. Continuing your diver education is a great way to stay sharp because you use existing skills while developing new ones. You can do this in the PADI Advanced Open Water Diver course, specialty diver courses, and other programs that expand your experience and qualifications. Most recreational diving uses air as a breathing gas. Air is actually a mix of gases. Practically speaking, it is 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen. We'll look at 4 issues that relate to breathing air underwater: oxygen toxicity, contaminated air, decompression sickness, and gas narcosis. We'll look at oxygen toxicity, contaminated air, and decompression sickness in this section, and gas narcosis later in Section 5. Although we need oxygen to live, under pressure, oxygen becomes toxic. It also has fire and combustion issues with equipment. When using air within recreational depth limits, though, neither of these are significant issues. Enriched air nitrox, however, is air enriched with oxygen, so it has a lower nitrogen proportion and a higher oxygen proportion. This has advantages compared to using regular air, but oxygen toxicity and equipment concerns can be issues with enriched air nitrox. You can learn to handle these issues in the PADI Enriched Air Diver course. But until you're certified as an enriched air diver, don't use a cylinder labeled as an enriched air cylinder. Contaminated air is air with impurities in it. It's very rare in diving. Contaminated air may smell or taste bad, but not necessarily. Signs and symptoms of contaminated air include headache, nausea, dizziness, unresponsiveness, and cherry red lips or nail beds. Never dive with air that smells or tastes bad, and end the dive immediately if you start feeling ill. Have a diver who may have breathed contaminated air breathe fresh air and provide oxygen if available. Contact emergency medical care. Avoid contaminated air by getting your cylinder filled only by reputable professional scuba centers. These operators use specialized breathing air compressors and filters and know the value of regular air testing. You've learned that you have time limits underwater beyond how long your air lasts or how long you stay warm. One of these comes from nitrogen. During a dive, increased pressure causes nitrogen to dissolve from your air into your body tissues. The greater the pressure, that is, the deeper you are, and the longer you're down, the more nitrogen dissolves into your body. Your body doesn't use nitrogen, so when you ascend and the pressure drops, this excess nitrogen dissolves back out of your body tissues. If the extra nitrogen isn't excessive, this happens harmlessly. Your dive computer, or tables like the RDP table or ERDPML, helps you keep excess nitrogen within accepted limits. More about this shortly. If there's too much dissolved nitrogen, however, when you ascend, it may come out of solution faster than your body can eliminate it. Bubbles can form in body tissues, causing decompression sickness, which is a serious medical condition, sometimes called the bends or DCS. Signs and symptoms include paralysis, shock, weakness and prolonged fatigue, dizziness, numbness, tingling, difficulty breathing, limb and joint pain, and in severe cases, unconsciousness and death. DCS signs and symptoms may be obvious, but they can also be subtle, like a mild to moderate ache, weakness, or prolonged undue fatigue. They occur within 15 minutes to 12 hours after a dive, though some longer intervals have occurred. Symptoms may be intermittent. Regardless, treat all suspected cases of decompression sickness as serious. We'll look at the first aid for it in Section 5. Time and depth primarily influence how your body absorbs and releases nitrogen, but physiologists think some other factors predispose people to DCS. These include fatigue, dehydration, vigorous exercise, cold, poor fitness, illness and injuries, alcohol consumption, and age. In the next subsection, you'll learn how to help adjust for these if any of them apply to you. To keep the risk of decompression sickness very low, we need to keep excess nitrogen levels within accepted limits. But there's no way to measure the actual nitrogen dissolving into our bodies, so we use dive computers and dive tables. Dive computers and dive tables apply a mathematical model to estimate the changes in body nitrogen before, during, and after a dive. Based on the outcomes of thousands of dives, decompression models are highly reliable for the vast majority of people, most of the time. But they don't assess anything actually going on in your body, and they don't know if any predisposing factors apply to you. Because people vary in their susceptibility to decompression sickness, no dive computer or dive table can guarantee that decompression sickness will never occur, even though you dive within its limits. As a diver, you must accept that some risk of DCS remains. To help reduce and manage the remaining risk, the key is to always dive well within dive computer or table limits. And be a safe diver. Slowly ascend from every dive, no faster than 18 meters or 60 feet per minute, or slower as specified by your computer. Make a safety stop at 5 meters or 15 feet. All of these practices help keep you well within the model's predications. As a recreational diver, you always make no-stop dives. This means that at any time during a dive, you could ascend directly to the surface if you had to. To do this, you stay within your computer's no-stop limits, which you can access before the dive for planning. The deeper you dive, the faster you absorb nitrogen. So as you can see, the no-stop limits get significantly shorter as depth increases. Times differ slightly with different models, but these are typical. During the dive, your computer updates your no-stop time based on the time you spend at each depth. Your remaining time will be shortest at your deepest point, but it increases as you ascend because nitrogen absorption slows. Diving so you get more time by ascending to a shallower depth is called multi-level diving. This is one of the big advantages of dive computers. Tables base your time limit on your deepest depth, even if you don't stay that deep the whole dive, which is often not the case. Note that the exception to this is the ERDP-ML, which lets you plan multi-level dives. Let's look at how your limits might change during a typical dive. These divers want to dive to 18 meters or 60 feet, explore a bit, then gradually work their way upward so they stay well within no-stop limits and have 50 bar or 500 psi air left when they surface. During pre-dive planning, they scroll their no-stop times. Their computers show 140 minutes no-stop time at 12 meters or 40 feet, and 55 minutes at 18 meters or 60 feet. They decide they will descend to 18 meters or 60 feet, then start back up at 30 minutes. The dive goes as planned. After half an hour at 18 meters or 60 feet, their computers show 25 minutes no-stop time remaining. They head upward along the reef and level off at 12 meters or 40 feet. their computers show 83 minutes no stop time. This is a lot more time than they had at 18 meters or 60 feet, but their bodies have absorbed nitrogen, so it's less than the 140 minutes they had before diving. However, it's more no stop time than they have air, so they end the dive with enough air to ascend, make a safety stop, and surface with a 50 bar or 500 psi reserve. Dive computers and tables' ascent rates are part of their calculations, so stay within these rates. Safety stops are not required for surfacing within model limits, but you make them for added conservatism well within limits. In an emergency, like an out-of-air situation, you would omit the stop, but otherwise make it. If you accidentally exceed a no-stop limit, on the other hand, you must make a decompression stop, exceed model limits, and have an unacceptable decompression sickness risk. You'll learn more about emergency decompression stops in Section 5. After a dive, your no-stop times are shorter than before the dive. This is because your body still has excess nitrogen from the previous dive. We call the nitrogen from a previous dive residual nitrogen, and a dive made while you still have residual nitrogen a repetitive dive. When you make a repetitive dive, your no-stop limits are shorter because you already have nitrogen in your body. Your computer must account for this residual nitrogen as well as what dissolves into your body on the repetitive dive. You have to wait several hours without diving, usually 12 or more, before body nitrogen levels return to normal. After that, a dive isn't considered a repetitive dive. Although you still have nitrogen in your body after a dive, during a surface interval between dives, the nitrogen levels decline. As a result, the longer the surface interval, the more no-stop time you have on a repetitive dive. Your computer calculates your theoretical nitrogen levels continuously, so it is important that you use the same computer for all dives throughout the day. It remembers your residual nitrogen, so don't share or trade computers, and don't turn it off. Most models won't let you anyway. If you don't dive with the same computer continuously, it can't accurately calculate theoretical nitrogen. Diving without using the same computer for all dives greatly increases your risk of decompression sickness. And follow any additional manufacturer recommendations regarding the use of a computer for repetitive diving. Before using your dive computer, read the manufacturer literature completely. Dive computers vary in their features and layout, but as a minimum, virtually all tell you your no-stop limits before a dive. While underwater, you can read your depth, elapsed time, and your no-stop time remaining. An ascent rate indicator guides your ascent speed, and emergency decompression information comes up if you accidentally exceed a no-stop limit. Between dives, you can read your surface interval time and recall previous dive information. When you're ready to plan your dive, you activate it by pressing a button or touching contacts like this. With your buddy, agree on a maximum depth and time based on the scrolled no-stop limits. Remember that repetitive dives have shorter no-stop limits, and that shallower dives and multi-level dives have longer ones. Plan a maximum time and your air use limits. You often have far more no-stop time than your air will last. You turn the dive based on whichever limit you or your buddy reaches first: time, air supply turn point, or remaining no-stop time. You may want to note these on a slate to reference during the dive. There are 6 guidelines to follow while diving with your computer. 1. Dive the plan. Don't go deeper or stay longer than planned just because your computer will let you. 2. Stay well within computer limits. Never let your remaining no-stop time get close to 0. 3. Follow the most conservative computer, yours or your buddy's. 4. Watch your SPG and manage your air supply. 5. When you can, start at the deepest point and progress shallower. When making more than one dive, make the deepest dive first. This gives the most no stop time and is considered a conservative diving practice. And 6. Ascend slowly within your computer's ascent rate and make a safety stop. Dive computer failure is very rare. Most self-check and confirm adequate battery power when activated. If one fails during a dive, however, you have 2 options. The first is to ascend, make a safety stop, and end the dive. By diving well within limits, you should be within acceptable theoretical nitrogen limits. If you have 2 computers and have been diving with both of them, your second option is to continue the dive with the working computer. If your computer fails between dives and you've been diving with 2, you can make another dive using the one that works. If you've been diving with one computer and it fails, you may be able to continue diving by using your time and depth information with dive tables, a depth gauge, and timer. Otherwise, you need to wait 12 hours before diving again with a working computer. Divers are not a significant threat to the underwater world, but it's important that we apply environmentally friendly dive techniques. Diver damage is inconsiderate. Other divers want to see the natural beauty and cultural heritage you see. It can also add to the problems where pollution already stresses the environment. More importantly, as a diver, you have a role as the underwater world's ambassador, and how you dive sets an example. Divers see the underwater world firsthand and are often the first witnesses to problems. How you dive is part of your credibility when you explain what you see and add your voice to initiatives that inform the public and protect the underwater world. You can also take direct actions, such as participating in cleanups, removing invasive species, or collecting data for scientists. To learn more about how you can apply your role as a diver to preserving the underwater world, see your PADI resort or dive center and visit projectaware.org. A skill you'll learn is how to put on your scuba kit at the surface. This is a common part of small boat entries, but you may do this from almost any size vessel, from docks and other situations. With your equipment fully assembled, go through your pre-dive safety check, even though you're not wearing it. Make sure it will float. You may need to put your weights in after you get into it. If you're not using a weight-integrated BCD, you'll put your weights on after you have your dive kit on. Don't enter the water without a BCD while wearing your scuba weight system. When ready, put your gear in the water, on a line if you won't get in right away, or your buddy can hand it to you after you enter. Enter using a suitable technique, like the controlled seated entry. For this entry, sit like this and put both hands on the deck, like this. Pivot onto your hands and lower yourself in, like this. Now, unbuckle the waistband, hold your kit upright and slip into it. It may help to have just enough air in the BCD so it barely floats. Another technique is to sit on your rig, like this. Stick your arms in and then slip forward so it rides up into place. After it's on, secure and adjust the harness. Then put on your weight system if it was too heavy to put on before. Once your buddy's in his kit, finish the F step, final check of the pre-dive safety check to be sure all straps are secure and that you didn't accidentally trap any hoses. You can also use the controlled seated entry while wearing scuba. Partially inflate your BCD and breathe from your regulator as you would on any entry. Be sure the bottom of your cylinder has cleared the platform edge before you lower yourself into the water. You may have to help a buddy who's tired or who has a cramp or other problem that makes swimming difficult. First, be sure you're both buoyant. Use the cylinder valve toe for short distance tows, like this. For longer distances, the tired diver push lets you see where you're going. Put the diver's feet on your shoulders and your hands on his knees, like this, and swim at a slow, steady pace. This skill combines your neutral buoyancy skill with descending, swimming and ascending just as you will in open water. You'll pretend that the bottom or an area is fragile, like coral, and avoid contact with it. When ready, make a 5-point descent with your buddy using a line or other references as a visual reference only. Control your descent by controlling your buoyancy so that you stop and achieve neutral buoyancy about 1 to 1.2 meters or 3 to 4 feet above the bottom. Then, control your buoyancy and swim without touching the bottom. Control your movements, not just your buoyancy. Learn to only make contact with something when you intend to. Return to the reference line and make a 5-point ascent using it as a visual reference only, again without touching the bottom. If you lost your mask and couldn't recover it, you'd have to end the dive without it. The no mask swim lets you practice this. Remove your mask and make buddy contact. Keep your eyes open if you can, but close them if you're wearing contacts. Swim at least 15 meters or 50 feet, equalizing your ears and controlling your buoyancy with your buddy assisting. Concentrate on breathing through your mouth. If you get a little water in your nose, exhale through it. After completing the swim, replace and clear your mask. In Section 3, you learn that you can breathe from a free-flowing regulator. To simulate a free flow, you or your instructor will depress the purge button. Remember to hold the mouthpiece against your lips, like this. Don't seal your mouth on it, but you can insert one side if it helps. Let the excess air escape as you sip the air you need from the flow. After practicing, check your SPG. You may be surprised at how much air you used. This shows that it's important to start your ascent promptly when breathing from a free-flowing regulator. If you have to disconnect your low-pressure inflator, you can orally inflate your BCD underwater to control your buoyancy. Hold the inflator or deflator in your left hand like this. Take a breath from your regulator, then blow a third to half your breath into your BCD, like this, and save enough to clear your regulator. Go back to your regulator, then repeat the process if you need more buoyancy. Don't forget, blow bubbles when the regulator's out of your mouth. After establishing neutral buoyancy, hover for 60 seconds using breath control and making small adjustments as needed. Skin diving, breath hold diving without scuba, lets you scout an area or explore shallow water without wasting scuba air. You can also skin dive where scuba diving isn't available. Proper breathing helps you hold your breath longer. Relax and breathe from your diaphragm. The practice of hyperventilation, breathing deeply and/or rapidly before holding your breath, was once common, but is no longer preferred because if not done properly, it may cause you to lose consciousness underwater, which can cause drowning. relaxed diaphragm breathing will help you hold your breath longer. When you return to the surface after a breath hold dive, breathe normally from your diaphragm. A strong exhalation after surfacing from a long breath hold can cause you to become faint. Relax for several minutes while your body oxygen and carbon dioxide levels return to normal. If you feel dizzy or lightheaded, or feel tingling in your hands, arms, or feet, stop diving down. Rest. Relax and breathe at the surface until you fully recover. Use a head-first surface dive, sometimes called a duck dive, to get underwater quickly. Swim forward, breathing relaxed from your diaphragm. Then hold a breath and bend forward, like this. See how you lift your legs as straight and high as you can? Their weight pushes you down efficiently. Swim downward, equalizing as you've already learned. Relax and explore. With practice, you may be surprised how long you can stay on one breath. Notice that your buddy stays up while you're down. Take turns, one up, one down. That way, if someone needs help, the buddy comes down to assist with a fresh breath. When you feel the urge to breathe, look up, reach up, and turn so you can see as you come up. While looking up, exhale as you go through the last meter or few feet of water. Keep exhaling as you roll forward to a swimming position, and your snorkel should be nearly clear of water. If not, use the blast method you learned earlier. Some divers prefer the blast method in any case. Sometimes you take your kit off in the water to exit. Inflate your BCD, then remove and hand up your weights. Switch to your snorkel, then release your harness and slip out of your rig. It may help to only inflate the BCD enough for your rig to float. Keep all your other gear in place. Then hand up your kit or tie it to a line. If you're exiting without a ladder, like onto a small boat or low dock, push up with your arms and kick to raise yourself. Twist into a seated position like this. Or lower yourself onto your chest and roll over like this. Once out, lift your kit from the water.
Often, you make a dive, spend some time topside, and then plan your repetitive dive based on the no-stop limits your computer shows. But not always. Sometimes, you know how deep and long you want both dives to be, so instead you plan how long to wait between them. This is called finding a minimum surface interval. Imagine you and your buddy are diving on a wreck. Your first dive was to 18 meters, or 60 feet, for 40 minutes, and you plan to make a second to 15 meters, or 50 feet. You want to dive for 45 minutes, and based on experience, you know you have enough air to do that. Make a safety stop and surface with an adequate reserve. To stay well within limits, you agree your computer should show at least 50 minutes no-stop time before you start. So, how long do you have to wait after diving 18 meters or 60 feet for 40 minutes to have 50 minutes no-stop time at 15 meters or 50 feet? One way to find out is to simply scroll your no-stop limits periodically until your computer shows the time you want. This sounds imprecise, but as you gain experience, you get a feel for how much no-stop time you gain during surface intervals. A second way is to use your dive computer's plan mode. Not all computers have this feature, but with some, after a dive, you can enter surface intervals and depths, and it shows the no-stop times. See the manufacturer literature or your instructor about this feature. You can also use a dive planning app, the RDP table, or the ERDPML, to find minimum surface intervals. These won't exactly match your dive computer, but it will give you a good approximation of how long you'll be at the surface. When planning, scroll your computer's no-stop times to confirm you have the time you want. The decompression models used in dive computers and tables are based on diving at sea level. You are under less pressure when you are higher up, so flying after diving and diving at altitude can increase decompression sickness risk. To address this, the dive medical community recommends waiting at least 12 hours before flying after a dive. If you make more than one dive or dive several days in a row, wait at least 18 hours. Flying after diving recommendations change periodically. Follow the current recommendations. You need to use altitude diving procedures for sites at 300 meters or 1,000 feet elevation or higher. You set some computers for altitude and some automatically adjust. See the literature for yours. With most dive tables, you use a special table that converts your actual depth to theoretical depth that adjusts for the pressure difference. Your instructor will help you with these options if you'll make your open water dives at altitude. You've learned that you want to stay warm to avoid hypothermia and to dive relaxed to avoid overexertion. Getting cold and strenuous activity may also increase decompression sickness risk. Although you want to avoid cold and strenuous dives, if you find yourself colder or working harder than expected, be even more conservative than usual. Using the RDP table or ERDPML, calculate cold or strenuous dives as 4 meters or 10 feet deeper than their actual depth. Safety stops may be especially prudent. If you accidentally exceed a no-stop limit, your computer will show emergency decompression stop depths and times. Don't ascend above the indicated stop depth. Your computer will show you when you can ascend to the surface or the next stop if you have more than one. Although it's important to complete emergency decompression stops, don't run out of air trying to do so. If you're low, complete as much of the stop as you can, but save enough air to surface and exit. After you're up, relax, breathe emergency oxygen if available, and monitor yourself for decompression sickness symptoms. Don't dive for at least 24 hours. Many dive computers will lock into an error mode for that long if you don't complete a required decompression stop. Lung overexpansion injuries and decompression sickness have the same first aid, so we don't worry about distinguishing between them when we help a diver. The dive community groups them both under the term decompression illness, or DCI. Follow the steps you learned in Section 3 for helping an unresponsive diver. Monitor the diver's breathing and give CPR as needed. Contact emergency medical care, including the local diver emergency service if there is one. Keep the diver lying down, breathing emergency oxygen. Lay an unresponsive, breathing diver left side down, head supported like this. Give the diver aid until emergency care takes over. Nearly all DCI cases require putting the diver back under pressure and extended therapy in a recompression chamber. Don't delay first aid and getting the diver to treatment. The faster treatment begins, the lower the risk of permanent residual symptoms. Under pressure, nitrogen and oxygen have an intoxicating effect called gas narcosis. It's not directly harmful, but it can impair good judgment and coordination. The signs and symptoms include feeling intoxicated, loss of coordination, slowed thinking, slowed reactions, inappropriate laughter, depression, a false sense of security, a disregard for safety, and when under stress, anxiety and/or panic. Narcosis affects people differently, but most divers begin to notice it at depths approaching 30 meters or 100 feet. Being tired and the use of drugs and alcohol can make it noticeable even shallower. Diving in cool water, darkness, or limited visibility seem to make it more noticeable, while diving experience seems to reduce its effects. Generally, narcosis isn't likely to be a significant issue on dives shallower than 30 meters or 100 feet. If you do experience it, though, ascend to a shallower depth. It usually passes quickly. During your open water dives, you'll practice navigating with an underwater compass. This basic skill helps you save air and know where you are in relation to your exit point throughout the dive. A standard compass looks like this. The north needle or indicator always points to magnetic north. The lubber line is always your travel direction. The bezel rotates so that you can set the index marks over the north needle, and the heading references allow you to record directions. Hold and swim with your compass like this. Level, with a lubber line aligned with your body center line. Look over the compass as you swim with it. For console-mounted compasses, hold it like this. To set it, point the lubber line in your desired travel direction and let the north needle settle. Then rotate the index marks over the needle. Now, keep the needle within the marks and the lubber line in line with your body as you swim. If you turn off course, the needle leaves the marks. Stop, turn back onto course, and then continue. While you navigate, your buddy maintains contact and watches the depth. To return on a reciprocal course, rotate the bezel 180 degrees and then turn until the needle's within the index marks. Now you're facing the way you came. Some compasses have 2 sets of index marks, so you don't have to reset the bezel. Just use the other set. A growing number of dive computers have electronic compasses. They operate similarly, but have different displays. See the manufacturer and your instructor about using yours if you have one. Throughout this course, you've learned about the limits you're responsible for staying within as a newly certified PADI open water diver. Let's summarize some of them. You were trained to a maximum depth of 18 meters or 60 feet, or the actual depth you've reached if shallower. With additional experience and training beyond the open water diver course, the maximum depth for recreational diving is 40 meters or 130 feet. You are also trained to dive in conditions as good as or better than those in which you train, within the no-stop limits of your dive computer or tables. You're qualified to participate in the PADI Advanced Open Water Diver course, discover local diving program, and many but not all PADI specialty diver courses. Ultimately, it is your responsibility to set your limits for each dive based upon your assessment of your skills, comfort level, and the dive conditions. One challenge new divers sometimes face is how to stay involved with diving. The dive community has found 3 things that will help you do this. First, involve yourself in social settings where you can meet other people to dive with. Second, go to different places to dive. And continue to learn by continuing your diver education. It's easy to meet friends to dive with. Start with your PADI resort or dive center. They usually have clubs and activities, so jump in and join the fun. Meet divers online with Scuba Earth and other social sites. Attend local dive shows and invite some of your non-diving friends to become divers. You also meet people through group dive travel. Your local dive operator likely organizes local and distant dive outings, as do dive clubs. With experience, you'll start planning individual trips too. Set training goals. What do you want to accomplish as a diver? Then take dive courses that take you toward your goals and that interest you. This is another way to meet divers, and you can often package a course with dive travel. It's also been found that divers who invest in their scuba kit continuing diving and get more out of it. This isn't surprising. As you learned earlier, your own gear is the gear you prefer, adjusted for you, and suited to the diving you like. The purpose of the PADI system of diver education is to help you dive safely, but also to help you continue to enjoy diving. It provides a clear path with choices for growing in and enjoying diving in the ways and areas that you want. You may even already be thinking about one day becoming a PADI open water scuba instructor. By continuing your education with the PADI system, you learn new skills, make new diving friends, learn more about different kinds of equipment, and visit new places and dive sites. Talk to your instructor or dive operator about your interests, and visit PADI.com regularly for updates and additions to what the PADI system offers. It's very rare that you remove and replace your kit underwater, but you learn to do so for situations in which you might need to, such as getting out of some entanglement, or once in a while to make an adjustment. This is one of the few skills where it's important to be negatively buoyant, so find insensitive bottom away from fragile aquatic life. Negative buoyancy and kneeling helps you control your stability once you take your kit off, especially with weight-integrated BCDs. Here's one way to do this, though there are others. With a low to moderate amount of weight in a weight-integrated BCD, or without integrated weights, deflate your BCD completely. If you have a lot of weight in a weight-integrated BCD, you may want to have just a bit of air so you can handle it. After deflating it, kneel with your right knee up like this. Loosen and release the straps, then take the unit off, starting with your left arm. This is important for keeping your regulator in place. Keep your kit upright and don't let go. Immediately stand it on your right knee, close to your body. This keeps its weight where you need it to offset your exposure suit's buoyancy. Keep your right arm partially through the opening to control it. You can completely remove both arms and lay it horizontally on your knee or lap if circumstances require, though you'll need to stand it back up to put it back on. Replace the unit like a coat, starting with your right arm, again so your regulator stays in place. Pull it all the way onto your right shoulder so the weight stabilizes you. It may help to hold the bottom of your cylinder with your right hand and lean forward just a bit. Then slide your left arm in. Before fastening the straps, double check that you're not trapping any hoses or accessories. The main reason to remove and replace weights underwater is to adjust your trim or to adjust your weight. Sometimes a weight pouch comes loose or you have some other weight system adjustment to make. How you do this depends upon your weight system. You may remove and replace individual weights, weight pockets, or your entire belt. This is another skill in which negative buoyancy helps. On insensitive bottom, deflate your BCD, then kneel with a knee up on the side from which you're removing weights or the right knee with a weight belt. Remove the pocket or weight and rest it on your knee. Replace it much like you would at the surface. With many systems, it helps to lean back so it slides into place. Your instructor will show you the techniques best suited to your kit. With a weight belt, release it and pull it from behind your back with the buckle side, the left side free, and drape it on your knee, like this. Replace it like this, much as you would at the surface. Remember to bend or lie forward, face downward after you have it in place, so it rests in the small of your back. This takes tension off the buckle so you can resecure it easily. Check for trapped hoses before tightening it completely. Sometimes you have to descend or ascend without a reference that you can see or touch. Follow the same 5-point descent and ascent step you learned, but watch your computer and control your speed with your BCD. To practice this in confined water, ignore any visual clues and reference your buddy and your computer. As you descend, equalize, maintain contact, and adjust your buoyancy. Don't rush. It's easier to control a slow descent than a rapid one. While ascending again, maintain buddy contact. Hold on to each other if necessary. Control your buoyancy and ascent rate. Again, slower is easier. Make a safety stop by hovering in midwater at 5 meters or 15 feet. To practice this in confined water, stop about halfway between the bottom and the surface. If you need to navigate while descending or ascending without a reference, one technique is for buddies to hang on to each other. One navigates while the other controls the descent or ascent depth and rate. You can practice this in confined water also. During the course, you'll make one or more mini dives. Mini dives are simulated dives in which you practice the steps of the actual dive much as you would in open water. Your instructor will have you and your buddies plan these much as you would an open water dive, including your time and air supply limits. You'll conduct pre-dive safety checks and use appropriate entries and exits for water too deep in which to stand. Each mini dive will have specific skills and objectives that your instructor will assign, plus you'll practice the skills you want to with your buddy, play around a bit, and generally enjoy being underwater. Learning to dive can be challenging, but it's also rewarding, exciting, and new. At this point, you've learned a lot about diving, and soon you'll be completing your open water dives. But as exhilarating and satisfying as it is to become a PADI open water diver, it's only the beginning. Dive conservatively, follow your training, and keep learning. And a lifetime of underwater adventure awaits you. Welcome to diving.